"Now you finally know," Olivia whispered, and she didn't even pull the sheets up to cover herself. Emily stood frozen in her own bedroom doorway, watching her husband's arms still wrapped around her younger sister, and Ryan looked up at her and smiled. Not panic, not shame. He smiled. "You're home early," he said, as if she were the intruder in her own life. And in that single devastating moment, Emily understood that the marriage she'd built, the family she trusted the entire world she'd poured herself into for 9 years, had been a lie everyone knew but her. Everyone. Even her own parents. Especially her own parents. Before we go any further, if this story moves you, please take 1 second to subscribe to this channel and follow Emily's journey all the way to the end. And in the comments below, tell me the name of the city where you're watching from right now, because I would love to see how far Emily's story has traveled across this beautiful country of ours. Now let's begin. The keys slipped from Emily Carter's fingers and hit the hardwood floor she had personally chosen at a warehouse outlet 18 months earlier. She remembered kneeling in that dusty showroom, running her palm across the samples, telling Ryan that this honey oak would make the apartment feel warm, feel like a real home, feel like a place where a family could grow. He had barely looked at it then. He looked at it now, though. He looked at everything now with the calm of a man who had already decided he owned it all. "Emily," Ryan said, sliding to the edge of the mattress, reaching for his shirt without any real hurry, "let's be adults about this." Adults. The word landed in her stomach like a stone dropped into a well. She was 31 years old. She had spent 9 of those years loving this man. She had worked double shifts at Meridian General, coordinating patient care, comforting frightened families in waiting rooms, holding the hands of strangers as they received the worst news of their lives. And every single night, she had come home to this apartment believing she was building something. And the whole time, the thing she was building had been rotting from the inside. "How long?" Emily managed. Her voice didn't sound like her own. It sounded thin, stretched like a wire about to snap. Olivia pulled the robe tighter and sat up against the headboard, and there was something in her expression that Emily would never forget for the rest of her life. It wasn't guilt. It was satisfaction. "Does it matter?" Olivia said. "How long?" Emily repeated louder this time. "Over a year," Ryan answered, buttoning his shirt with steady fingers. "And honestly, it's been the only real thing in my life for a long time." Over a year. Emily's mind spun backward through every dinner, every anniversary, every time she had canceled plans with friends because Ryan said he wasn't feeling well, every time she had noticed Olivia growing distant and blamed herself for being a bad older sister. Every family gathering where her mother had watched her with that strange tightness around the eyes that Emily had mistaken for worry. It hadn't been worry. It had been something so much worse. "Do Mom and Dad know?" Emily asked. And the silence that followed that question was the loudest thing she had ever heard. Ryan and Olivia exchanged a glance, quick, practiced, the glance of 2 people who had rehearsed this moment, who had discussed it, who had a plan for when it finally happened. And in that half-second, Emily understood that she had not walked into an accident. She had walked into the ruins of a conspiracy that everyone in her life had been keeping alive around her, feeding it, protecting it while smiling at her across holiday tables. "Get out of my apartment," Emily whispered. Ryan actually laughed. Not cruelly, which somehow made it worse. He laughed the way you laugh at a child who says something adorable and completely wrong. "Emily," he said gently, "we need to talk about the lease and the accounts. There's a lot to sort through, and I think if we're all reasonable, nobody has to make this ugly." The accounts. Later, Emily would understand exactly what that word meant. But right then, standing in the doorway of the life she thought she had, she couldn't process finances or leases or reason. She turned and walked out, leaving the keys on the floor where they had fallen, because in that moment she couldn't bear to bend down and pick them up in front of them. She would not give them that. She would not fold herself in half in front of the 2 people who had spent a year laughing at her behind her back. She made it to her car before her legs gave out. She sat in the driver's seat in the parking garage and gripped the wheel and did not cry, not yet, because the grief hadn't caught up to the shock. Her hands were shaking so hard she couldn't get the key into the ignition. So she just sat, and she called the one person she still believed would defend her. She called her mother. Diane Carter answered on the third ring, and her voice was cautious, careful, already braced. "Emily, honey, Mom!" Emily's voice broke on the single syllable. "Mom, I just walked in on Ryan and Olivia, together, in my bed. Mom, they were in my bed." There was a pause on the line, and that pause told Emily everything. "Sweetheart," Diane said slowly, "I need you to take a deep breath and stay calm." "Calm?" Emily choked. "Mom, did you hear what I said? Your daughter's husband is sleeping with your other daughter. He's been sleeping with her for over a year in my home." "I know," Diane said. 2 words. "I know." Emily felt the parking garage tilt around her. "You know?" Emily whispered. "What do you mean you know?" "Emily, please. Your father and I have known for a while. We didn't want it to come out like this. We were hoping there was a way to handle it that didn't tear the whole family apart." The whole family apart, as if the family hadn't already been torn apart, as if the tearing hadn't been done by Ryan and Olivia, and it turned out by her own mother and father who had looked her in the eyes for over a year, knowing what they knew and said nothing, who had chosen the affair over the truth, who had chosen the comfort of a lie over the daughter who called them every Sunday. "How long have you known?" Emily said, and now the tears were coming hot and fast and silent. "Emily, how long, Mom?" "About a year," Diane admitted. "Maybe a little longer. Olivia came to us. She was in a difficult place, and honey, these things, sometimes they just happen, and we thought the kindest thing was to let it run its course quietly, and hope that what?" Emily's voice cracked open. "Hope that I never found out. Hope that I'd just keep going to work and paying the bills while my husband and my sister laughed at me. Is that the family you wanted to keep together? A family built on that?" "Don't be dramatic," Diane said, and there it was, the pivot, the thing families like the Carters always did. When they couldn't defend the indefensible, they made the wounded one the problem. "Nobody wants to hurt you, but Ryan and Olivia have something real, and pretending otherwise won't help anyone. The mature thing, the loving thing, is to let them build their life and find your own peace with it." Emily sat in stunned silence, listening to her mother explain in the same soothing tone she had used to read bedtime stories 25 years ago, why Emily should quietly step aside and let her sister keep her husband. Why Emily's dignity was less important than the family's convenience. Why the betrayal was in the end Emily's burden to carry gracefully. "Where's Dad?" Emily said finally. "He's here. Do you want to talk to him? Put him on." There was a rustle, a murmur, and then her father's voice. And Robert Carter had always been a man of few words, a man who fixed things, who showed up, who Emily had believed right up until this moment would walk through fire for her. "Emmy," he said, "Dad, tell me you didn't know." The silence stretched and stretched, and in that silence, the last pillar holding up Emily's entire understanding of her life crumbled to dust. "I knew," Robert said quietly. "I'm sorry, Emmy. I didn't like it. But your mother thought. You knew." Emily was fully crying now, the kind of crying that came from somewhere below the lungs, somewhere ancient. "Dad, you walked me down the aisle. You put my hand in his hand. And you knew he was doing this, and you said nothing. You let me keep believing." "I didn't know how to tell you," her father said, and his voice was thick. "There was never a good time. Never a good time." Emily laughed through the tears, a terrible broken sound. "You had a year, Dad. You had 365 days of good times. You had Thanksgiving. You had my birthday. You sat across from me at my birthday dinner, while Olivia sat next to my husband, and you all knew, and you sang happy birthday to me, and you knew." Robert didn't answer. "I have to go," Emily said. "Emmy, wait. Where are you going to stay? You can come home, we can." "Home." The word tasted like ash. "I don't have a home. I thought I had 2. Turns out I never had either." She hung up before he could respond, and then she did cry, fully, completely folded over the steering wheel of her car in a concrete parking garage, 31 years old, married for 6 years, employed, insured, responsible, and utterly alone, in a way she had never imagined a person could be alone. Because there is a specific kind of loneliness that only comes when the people who were supposed to protect you turn out to be the ones who set the trap. It is not the loneliness of having no one. It is the loneliness of discovering that the ones you counted on were counting against you the entire time. She didn't go back up to the apartment that night. She couldn't. Instead, she drove to a cheap motel off the interstate, the kind with a flickering sign and a vending machine that ate her dollar, and she paid for one night with a credit card she prayed still had room on it. She sat on the edge of the sagging mattress and opened her banking app because some cold, practical part of her, the part that had survived, needed to know exactly how bad things were. And that was when Emily learned what Ryan had meant by the accounts, the joint savings account they had built together over 6 years, the account that was supposed to be their down payment on a real house. Someday, the account that held nearly $40,000 of mostly her contributions showed a balance of $11.43. Emily stared at the number. She refreshed the screen. $11.43. She scrolled through the transaction history and saw it 3 withdrawals over the past 2 months, moving the money out in careful chunks, small enough that she wouldn't get an alert, into an account she didn't recognize. He had been draining it slowly. He had been planning this. The affair wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a strategy. The moment she found out wasn't an accident of timing. He had wanted the money out first. He had wanted to be ready. Something happened to Emily in that motel room that she would spend the next 2 years trying to understand. It was not a breaking. She had already broken hours earlier in the parking garage. This was something else. This was the opposite of breaking. She looked at that number, $11.43, and instead of collapsing further, she felt something inside her go very still and very quiet and very hard, like a bone that has been shattered and begins cell by cell to knit itself back together stronger than before. She wiped her face. She opened a fresh document on her phone, and at the top she wrote a single word, evidence. Then she began to type everything she could remember. The date, the time she came home, what Ryan said, what Olivia said, what her mother admitted on the phone, what her father confirmed, the withdrawals, the dates, the amounts, the unfamiliar account number she screenshotted. She didn't know yet exactly what she would do with all of it, but she knew with a certainty that surprised her that she was done being the woman things happened to. From this night forward, she would be the woman who kept the receipts. The next morning, Emily walked into Meridian General on 2 hours of sleep, wearing yesterday's clothes, her eyes swollen and red, and she almost held it together. She almost made it. She badged in, she nodded at the security guard, she walked toward the coordinator station, and then her supervisor, Margaret Lawson, took one look at her across the hallway, and everything Emily had been holding in cracked wide open. Margaret was 63 years old, a nurse of nearly 40 years before she moved into administration, a woman who had seen every kind of human suffering the hospital walls could contain and had somehow come out of it kinder instead of harder. She crossed the hallway in 3 strides, took Emily by the elbow, and steered her into an empty consultation room without a word. She closed the door, and then she just held her. "I've got you," Margaret said quietly, while Emily shook against her shoulder. "Whatever it is, I've got you. Take your time." And Emily told her. All of it. The whole ugly story poured out in the sterile little room, and Margaret listened without interrupting, without judging, without once telling Emily to be calm or to be mature or to think about keeping the family together. She just listened, and her jaw tightened. And at the end, she said the thing that no one in Emily's own family had thought to say. "Where are you staying tonight?" "I don't know," Emily admitted. "A motel, I guess, until I figure something out." "No," Margaret said. "You'll stay with me. I have a spare room. My kids are grown and gone. My husband passed 4 years ago, and that room does nothing but collect dust. You'll stay there as long as you need, and you won't pay me a dime, and we won't discuss it further." Emily started to protest, because that was what you did. That was what a proud person did, and Margaret held up one weathered hand. "Emily," she said, "listen to me, because I'm old enough to have earned the right to say this plainly. In my experience, the people who most deserve help are the ones who feel least entitled to ask for it. You have spent years helping frightened families in this hospital. You have held strangers together on the worst days of their lives. Now it's your turn to let somebody hold you together. Say yes." And Emily, who had lost her husband, her sister, her parents, and her home, all in the span of a single day, looked at this woman who owed her nothing and was offering her everything, and she understood something that would become the foundation of the rest of her life. Family was not the people who shared your blood. Family was the people who showed up. Family was the people who said, "Where are you staying tonight?" and meant it. "Yes," Emily whispered. "Thank you. Yes." That night, Emily moved her one suitcase into Margaret's spare room, a bright little space with a quilt Margaret's own mother had sewn, and a window that looked out over a modest garden. She sat on the edge of the bed, and for the first time in 24 hours, she felt something other than pain. She felt a small, flickering, fragile thing she was almost afraid to name, because she knew that hope, once you let it in, could be used against you. Ryan had taught her that. Her whole family had taught her that. But sitting in Margaret's spare room, Emily made herself a promise. She said it out loud, quietly into the dark. "I am going to build a life so solid that no one can ever take it from me again. Not him, not her, not them. I am going to earn a home with my own 2 hands, and I am going to hold the keys to it, and no one will ever, ever hand me those keys and take them back. I will earn them, and they will be mine." She didn't know yet how she would do it. She had $11.43 to her name, a suitcase of clothes, a borrowed room, and a family that had thrown her away like something broken. But she also had a document titled Evidence and a stillness in her chest that had replaced the shaking, and a supervisor named Margaret who believed in her. And she had one more thing, though. She wouldn't recognize its full value for a long time. She had the truth. She was, for the first time in over a year, the only person in the whole tangled story who finally knew everything. And there is a strange and terrible power in that. The power of the one who can no longer be fooled. Over the following days, the phone calls started, and they were not what Emily expected. She had braced herself for silence for the family closing ranks around Ryan and Olivia and leaving her out in the cold. Instead, her mother called, and her father called, and even distant aunts called, and their message was always the same, delivered in tones of wounded reasonableness. "Come to the family dinner Sunday. Let's talk this through. Don't make things awkward. Think of the family. Be the bigger person. Don't drag everyone into your drama." Her drama. As if Emily had produced the affair. As if she had directed her husband into her sister's arms and then complained about the show she wrote. "They want me to come to Sunday dinner," Emily told Margaret one evening, staring at her phone in disbelief. "With all of them. With Ryan and Olivia there. Like nothing happened. My mother said it would mean so much to everyone if I could find it in my heart to be gracious." Margaret set down her coffee. "And what did you say?" "I haven't answered yet." Emily looked up. "Margaret, what's wrong with me? That part of me still wants to go. That part of me still wants their approval. They ruined my life, and I still some sick. Part of me still wants my mother to be proud of me." "There's nothing wrong with you," Margaret said gently. "That's the most human thing in the world. We're wired to want our parents' love. It doesn't switch off just because they don't deserve our trust. But Emily wanting their approval and organizing your life around getting it are 2 very different things. You can feel that longing and still choose not to walk back into a house full of people who betrayed you. Feeling it is human. Obeying it is a choice, and you get to make a different choice." Emily typed her reply to her mother that night. It was 3 sentences. "I won't be coming to dinner. I need time and space, and I need you to respect that. Please don't ask again." She hit send. Then she turned off her phone so she wouldn't have to see the response, and she slept for the first time since the world ended all the way through the night. But peace, Emily was learning, was not a gift that families like hers gave freely. 3 days later at work, she received an email that made her sit down hard in her chair. It was from Ryan, and it was cold and formal and clearly written by a lawyer, and it informed her that Ryan intended to keep the apartment that he considered the emptied savings account a matter of shared marital property that had simply been reallocated, and that if Emily attempted to make claims against him, she would find herself in a lengthy and expensive legal battle she could not afford. He was betting on her weakness. He was betting that a woman with $11 and a borrowed room could not fight a man with $40,000 of her own money in his pocket. He was betting that she would take the peaceful, quiet, gracious exit her family kept pushing on her, because that was easier, and because she was tired, and because he had spent 6 years learning exactly how far he could push her before she folded. He had learned wrong. Emily printed the email. She added it to her file. And then she did something that would have terrified the woman she had been just 1 week earlier. She looked up employment attorneys and family law attorneys who offered free consultations, and she made 3 appointments, and she walked into the first one with her document titled Evidence, and her screenshots and her printed emails, and she laid it all out on the desk, and she said the sentence that would define the next chapter of her life. My husband was having an affair with my sister for over a year with my parents' knowledge. He secretly drained our joint savings before I found out, and now he thinks I'm too weak and too broke to fight him. I want to know exactly how wrong he is. The attorney, a sharp woman in her 50s named Patricia Vance, read through everything slowly. Then she looked up over her glasses, and a slow smile spread across her face. "Miss Carter," Patricia said, "the fact that you documented all of this with dates, with amounts, with admissions, tells me one very important thing about you. It tells me you're not a victim, you're a witness. And a witness who keeps records is the most dangerous person in any courtroom." She tapped the printout of the bank withdrawals. "This here moving marital funds in structured amounts right before a separation, this isn't going to go the way your husband thinks it's going to go. Not at all." Emily walked out of that office and stood in the parking lot and let the afternoon sun fall on her face, and for the first time in what felt like years, she felt something rise in her chest that was not grief and was not fear. It was the very first spark of her own power, not power over anyone, power over herself, the power of a woman who had finally completely stopped waiting for anyone to rescue her because she had realized she was already doing it herself, one document, one appointment, one refused dinner invitation at a time. That night she called her mother back. She had promised herself she wouldn't, but there was one thing she needed to say, one door she needed to close herself so that no one could ever pretend it had been left open. "Emily?" Diane answered, warm and hopeful, clearly believing her daughter had come to her senses. "I'm so glad you called. Have you thought more about Sunday? Everyone misses you. Olivia especially. She feels just terrible about how things—" "Mom." Emily's voice was calm now, steady. The shaking was long gone. "I called to tell you something, and I need you to actually hear me. Are you listening?" "Of course, honey." "You had a choice," Emily said. "A year ago, when Olivia came to you, you had a choice. You could have protected your daughter who was being betrayed, or you could have protected the betrayal to avoid an awkward year. And you chose the betrayal. You looked at me for 365 days, and you chose to let me be humiliated rather than have one hard conversation. And I need you to understand that I know that now, fully. And I'm not angry, Mom. I'm past angry. I'm just clear." "Emily, that's not fair. We were in an impossible." "It was completely fair," Emily said. "And here is what's going to happen. I'm going to build a life, a good one, a real one, and you're going to hear about it from a distance because that's the distance you chose when you kept his secret. I'm not slamming any doors. I'm just walking through the one you already opened for me. Goodbye, Mom. Take care of yourself." And she hung up gently this time, not in anger, but with the quiet finality of a woman locking up a building she has decided to leave behind. She sat in the dark of Margaret's spare room in the bed under the handmade quilt, and she did not cry. She thought instead about the promise she had made herself that first night. A home, her own home, keys that no one could take. She thought about how impossibly far away that dream seemed with $11 in the bank. And then she thought about the withdrawal records sitting in Patricia Vance's office, and the free consultation that had turned into a real case, and the double shifts she could pick up starting Monday, and the certifications she could study for at night, and the promotions that discipline could earn. Every paycheck she decided would be a brick. Not a metaphor, a literal brick in a literal house that she would literally own. She would not beg her way back into a family that had thrown her out. She would not wait for Ryan to feel guilty, because men like Ryan never did. She would not spend one more hour of her one precious life trying to make the people who hurt her understand what they had done. She would just build, quietly, relentlessly, brick by brick. And somewhere across the city, in an apartment that still had honey oak floors, Emily had chosen. Ryan Mitchell and Olivia Carter were toasting to their future, entirely unaware that the woman they had thrown away was not broken at all. She was laying a foundation, and they had no idea that everything they had taken from her was about to become the exact fuel she needed to build something they would one day stand outside of in the cold, looking in through the window at a life they could never touch. But that was still a long way off. For now, Emily Carter turned off the lamp, closed her eyes in a borrowed room in the home of a woman who had chosen to love her, and slept the deep and dreamless sleep of someone who has finally, after the worst day of her life, stopped falling and started at long last to rise. Monday came, and Emily Carter walked into Meridian General with a new kind of quiet in her chest. She picked up 2 double shifts that first week, then 3 the next, until the other coordinators started asking if she ever went home. She didn't tell them the truth that home was a borrowed room in Margaret Lawson's house, and that every extra hour on the floor was another few dollars toward a dream she hadn't dared say out loud to anyone but herself. She just smiled and said she was saving up for something, and she left it at that. What she didn't expect was how fast the lies would travel. It started with a text from an old friend, Rebecca, who she hadn't spoken to in months. The message read, "Hey, are you okay? I heard about everything, and I just want you to know I don't believe the stuff people are saying." Emily stared at the phone. She typed back carefully, "What stuff?" The reply took a long time, and when it came, Emily had to read it 3 times before it sank in. According to Rebecca, the story circulating through their extended family and shared friends was that Emily had grown cold and distant in her marriage, that she'd become obsessed with work and money, that she'd emotionally abandoned Ryan for years, and that poor Olivia had simply been there to comfort a lonely man who had been neglected. In this version, Emily was the villain. Emily was the one who had broken something, and Ryan and Olivia were the wounded parties who had found unexpected solace in each other's arms. "They're saying I drove him to it," Emily said that night, sitting across from Margaret at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she hadn't touched. "My own mother is telling people I neglected my marriage, that I was cold, that it's basically my fault." Margaret didn't gasp. She didn't get dramatic. She had lived 63 years, and she had seen exactly this kind of thing before. And she set down her fork and looked at Emily with the steadiness of someone who had already known the world could be this ugly. "Of course they are," Margaret said. "Of course." Emily's voice cracked. "How can you say of course?" "Because they have to," Margaret said simply. "Think about it, Emily. Your parents made a choice a year ago to protect that affair. Now that choice is out in the open, and there are only 2 ways for them to live with what they did. Either they admit that they betrayed their own daughter, that they sat at the dinner table and lied to your face for a year, that they chose the comfortable lie over you. Or they convince everyone, including themselves, that you deserved it, that you were cold, that you were difficult, that you drove him away. One of those stories lets them sleep at night. The other doesn't. Which one do you think they're going to tell?" Emily sat with that, and the terrible clarity of it settled into her bones. They weren't lying about her because they hated her. They were lying about her because the truth was unbearable to them, and she was the price they were willing to pay to avoid it. "So what do I do?" Emily asked. "Do I call everyone? Do I explain what really happened? Do I fight it?" Margaret shook her head slowly. "You could. You could spend the next 2 years chasing down every rumor, calling every cousin, defending yourself to people who already decided what they wanted to believe. And you'd exhaust yourself, and half of them wouldn't change their minds anyway, and while you were doing all of that, you'd be pouring your energy into them instead of into you." She reached across the table and put her hand over Emily's. "Or you could let the lie run its little race, and you could go build a life so undeniable that eventually the lie just can't keep up. The best answer to being called a failure isn't an argument. It's a life they can't explain away." Emily didn't respond for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "That's going to be so much harder than just arguing." "Yes," Margaret said. "It is. The right thing usually is." So Emily chose the harder thing. She didn't call the relatives. She didn't post long explanations. She didn't beg anyone to believe her. She swallowed the injustice of it, and it burned going down, and then she took that burn and she turned it into fuel. The next morning, she walked into her supervisor's office, which was Margaret's office, though at work they kept things professional, and she said, "I want to know what it takes to move up. Certifications, extra training, whatever it is. I want the fastest legitimate path to earning more, and I want to start today." Margaret leaned back in her chair and looked at her for a long moment, and something like pride flickered across her face. "There's a case management certification," she said. "It's not easy. It usually takes people a year of study while working. It comes with a significant pay bump, and it opens doors to senior coordinator roles. Most people talk about doing it. Very few actually finish." "I'll finish," Emily said. "I believe you will," Margaret said. And so Emily's life narrowed to a single, relentless discipline. She worked her shifts, and then she studied. She studied in the break room during her lunch. She studied on the bus. She studied at the kitchen table until midnight, and then she woke at 5 to study some more before her early shifts. Margaret would find her asleep sometimes with her face on the textbook, and she would gently drape a blanket over her shoulders and leave her there, because she understood that this was not just studying. This was Emily rebuilding herself from the foundation up one page at a time. But building a new life didn't mean the old one would let her go quietly. The legal battle came for her, whether she was ready or not. Patricia Vance, her attorney, called her one afternoon while she was on shift, and Emily stepped into the stairwell to take it. "Emily," Patricia said, and her voice had an edge Emily hadn't heard before. "We have a problem, but I think it's actually going to become his problem. Ryan's lawyer just sent over their response, and they're claiming that the money he withdrew was used for legitimate shared expenses. $40,000 in shared expenses over 2 months. "That's a lie," Emily said. "We didn't have $40,000 in expenses. We didn't have anything close to that." "I know," Patricia said, and now Emily could hear the smile creeping back into her voice. "And that's exactly why it's his problem. Because now he has to prove it. He has to produce receipts, invoices, documentation for $40,000 of spending that never happened. And when he can't, which he can't because it doesn't exist, we're going to be able to show the court that he not only drained a marital account in a structured way right before separation, he then lied under oath about where it went. Emily, do you understand what that does to his credibility on everything else?" "Everything." Emily leaned against the cold cinder-block wall of the stairwell and closed her eyes. "So documenting everything really did matter." "Documenting everything is the whole ball game," Patricia said. "Ryan is used to being believed. He's charming, he's confident. He's the kind of man who's gotten away with things his whole life because he says them with a straight face and people just accept it. But a courtroom doesn't run on charm. It runs on evidence. And you, Emily Carter, walked into my office with more evidence than most people bring me after a year of digging. He picked the wrong woman to underestimate." When Emily hung up, she stood in that stairwell for a full minute, and for the first time, she let herself feel something dangerous. She let herself feel like she might actually win. But winning, she was learning, came in stages, and each stage had its own price. The family's pressure campaign shifted tactics. When guilt-tripping about Sunday dinners didn't work, and when spreading rumors didn't break her, they moved to something more direct. Her mother called one evening, and her voice was different this time, harder stripped of the wounded sweetness. "Emily, this lawsuit needs to stop." Emily set down her textbook. "Excuse me. You heard me. Dragging Ryan into court, going after his money, it's tearing this family apart. Olivia is beside herself. She cries every day. Your father can't sleep, and for what? So you can punish everyone so you can get some money. This isn't the daughter I raised." Emily almost laughed at the sheer staggering nerve of it. "The daughter you raised," she repeated softly. "Mom, that money is mine. I earned most of it working shifts you never saw, saving dollar by dollar for a future that Ryan stole out from under me before he even told me he was leaving. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm recovering what he took. There's a difference, and I think you know it." "He'll go bankrupt fighting you," Diane snapped. "Is that what you want, to ruin him?" "He won't go bankrupt fighting me," Emily said. "He'll go bankrupt because he stole $40,000 and then lied about where it went. Those are his choices, Mom. Not mine. I'm just the one who wrote them down." There was a long silence on the line, and then Diane played the last card. She had the card Emily had been waiting for, the one that told her everything about where her mother's real loyalty had always been. "If you go through with this," Diane said slowly, "you won't be welcome in this family anymore. I mean it, Emily. You'll be choosing this over us." And there it was, the threat. The great weapon that families like the Carters had always used to keep their members in line. Behave or be cast out. Stay quiet or lose us. And for most of her life, that threat would have worked on Emily. It would have terrified her into silence. It would have made her fold, apologize, comply, because the fear of losing her family had always been the most powerful force in her world. But her family had already cast her out. They just hadn't had the honesty to say it. They'd cast her out the day they chose Olivia's affair over her dignity. And so the threat, which was meant to be a knife at her throat, landed instead like a feather. "Mom," Emily said, and her voice was so calm it frightened even her, "you keep saying I'm choosing this over the family. But you already made that choice for me a year ago. You just didn't tell me until it was too late to do anything about it. So I'm not choosing anything. I'm just finally living in the reality you built. And in that reality, I'm getting my money back, and I'm building my own life. And if that means I'm not welcome at your table, then I guess I'll have to find a table where I am. Goodbye, Mom." She hung up, and this time she didn't feel grief. She felt free. The weeks turned into months, and Emily's discipline began to produce visible results. She passed the first section of her certification exam, then the second. Her double shifts and her frugal living meant that even while paying Patricia's modest retainer, she was slowly accumulating something she hadn't had since the night in the motel. Savings. Real savings. Not much at first, a few $100s, then $1,000, then more. She opened an account that only she could touch, and every time the balance grew, she felt that same stillness she'd felt in the motel room, the sense of laying one more brick in a wall no one could knock down. Margaret watched all of this with quiet satisfaction, and one night she said something that Emily would carry for years. "You know what I love about watching you these last few months? You've stopped flinching. When you first got here, you flinched every time your phone rang. You flinched when anyone raised their voice. You walked around this house like you were apologizing for taking up space. And now look at you. You walk like the floor belongs to you. That's not something I gave you, Emily. That's something you built." "You gave me the room to build it in," Emily said. "That counts for a lot." "The room was empty either way," Margaret said, waving her off. "You're the one who filled it." Then came the promotion. It happened faster than anyone expected. A senior coordinator position opened up when someone retired, and normally it would have gone to someone with more years in, but Emily had done something no one else had done. She'd nearly finished a certification that most people never completed. She'd taken on more shifts than anyone on the floor, and she'd developed a reputation among the nursing staff and the families as the coordinator, who never dropped a ball, who followed up, who remembered the details, who treated frightened people like human beings instead of case numbers. When the position opened, 3 different department heads independently recommended her. Margaret called her into the office to tell her, and this time she was fully in supervisor mode, formal professional, but there was a light in her eyes she couldn't hide. "Emily," she said, "I'm pleased to inform you that you've been selected for the senior coordinator role. It comes with a significant raise, better hours, and a leadership component. You'll be training the new coordinators." She paused. "You earned this, completely. I want you to hear that clearly, because I have a feeling that a part of you still doesn't believe you deserve good things. You earned this." Emily sat in the chair across from Margaret, and to her own embarrassment she started to cry. Not from sadness, from something she barely recognized because it had been so long. Pride. Earned, legitimate, unshakable pride. "I keep waiting for it to be taken away," she admitted. "Every good thing that happens, part of me is just waiting for someone to take it back." "That's what betrayal does," Margaret said gently. "It teaches you that good things are temporary and that the people you trust will pull the rug out. But Emily, you have to understand something. Ryan could take your marriage because you gave it to him. Your family could take your sense of belonging because you needed it from them. But this," she tapped the offer letter on the desk, "nobody gave you this. You took it. You built it. And the beautiful thing about the things you build yourself is that nobody can take them because they were never anyone's to give." That night, Emily sat down and did the math. Really did it for the first time. With the raise from the senior coordinator position, plus the certification bump that was coming, plus whatever she recovered from the lawsuit, plus her relentless saving, she could see it. Distant but real. A number that represented a down payment, a path to a home. Her own home. She wrote it all out on a piece of paper, the timeline, the milestones, the target, and she pinned it to the wall of Margaret's spare room, and every morning she looked at it before she left for work, and every night she looked at it before she slept. But just as the path was becoming clear, the past reached out one more time to try to drag her back. It was Olivia who called this time, her sister. The first direct contact since that afternoon in the apartment. Emily almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up some old thread of connection that hadn't fully snapped yet, and she immediately regretted it, and then she didn't. "Emily," Olivia said, and her voice was thick like she'd been crying. "Please don't hang up. I needed to talk to you, sister to sister." "We stopped being sisters the day you got in my bed with my husband," Emily said. "But go ahead, say what you called to say." Olivia took a shaky breath. "I know you hate me, and I understand, but they're not what you think with Ryan. It's harder than I thought it would be. He's different now that it's just us. He gets angry, and this lawsuit has him so stressed, and Mom and Dad keep fighting with him. And I feel so alone, Emily. And you're the only person who's ever really understood me." Emily sat very still, and she felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Not sympathy exactly. Recognition. Because she knew suddenly with perfect clarity what this call really was. Olivia wasn't calling to apologize. She was calling because she was miserable, and because the affair had turned out to be exactly the trap that anyone with sense could have predicted, and because now that she was living the life she'd stolen, she wanted her big sister back to comfort her through it. She wanted Emily to be her emotional support while she processed the consequences of destroying Emily's life. It was so audacious, so completely blind that Emily almost admired it. "Olivia," Emily said slowly, "let me make sure I understand. You had an affair with my husband for over a year. You let Mom and Dad lie to me for that entire time. You got the life you wanted, my husband, my apartment, my parents' approval, and now that it's not making you happy, you're calling me the woman you betrayed to be your shoulder to cry on. Is that about right?" There was a silence. Then in a small voice, "When you say it like that, it sounds bad." "It sounds bad because it is bad," Emily said. And then, because she was a different woman now than she'd been 6 months earlier, she added something she never would have been able to say before. "But here's what I want you to understand. Olivia, and I'm only going to say this once. The unhappiness you're feeling right now, the anger, the loneliness, the fear that you made a terrible mistake. That's not a punishment I'm sending you. That's just the truth arriving. You took something that wasn't yours, and it turned out that the thing you took was already broken, and now you're standing in the middle of the ruins, wondering why it doesn't feel like a victory. I can't help you with that. Nobody can. You're going to have to sit in what you built, just like I had to sit in what you did to me. The difference is, I didn't build mine, you built yours." "Emily, please, I don't have anyone else." "You have Ryan," Emily said. "You chose Ryan. Go talk to Ryan." And she hung up, and she felt no triumph, only a deep, tired sadness for the girl her sister had been before she became the woman on the other end of that phone. She told Margaret about the call that night, and Margaret listened, and at the end she said, "You handled that with more grace than I would have. What made you pick up in the first place?" Emily thought about it. "I think part of me needed to hear it," she said. "I needed to hear that the life they stole from me isn't the paradise they thought it was. Not so I could gloat, but so I could stop grieving it. For months I've been mourning the marriage I lost, the family I lost, like they were these perfect things that got taken from me. And that phone call reminded me that they weren't perfect. They were rotten. Ryan is exactly the same man with Olivia that he was becoming with me, angry, selfish, cold. My family is exactly as dishonest with her as they were with me. I didn't lose paradise. I escaped a trap, and I think I needed my sister to call me crying from inside that trap to finally understand that." Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know, in 40 years of nursing, I sat with a lot of people at the ends of their lives, and the ones who died at peace were never the ones who'd gotten revenge on the people who wronged them. They were the ones who'd stopped needing anything from those people at all. Freedom isn't getting even Emily. Freedom is not needing them to be sorry, and I think you just crossed that line tonight. The lawsuit reached its conclusion 3 months later, and it went almost exactly the way Patricia Vance had predicted. Ryan, faced with the impossible task of documenting $40,000 of expenses that never existed, and cornered by the structured withdrawals that painted him as someone deliberately hiding money before a separation folded. His own lawyer clearly told him he was going to lose badly, and that his lie about the expenses would poison his credibility on every other claim. He settled. He agreed to return the overwhelming majority of the drained savings, plus a portion of his own assets, to account for the marital property and his misconduct. Patricia called her with the news, and she was almost giddy. "We got it, Emily. We got nearly all of it back and then some. He caved completely. I have to tell you, in 26 years of doing this, it is rare, genuinely rare, to watch someone this arrogant get taken apart this cleanly by their own choices. He did this to himself. All we did was hold up a mirror." Emily sat down slowly. The money was coming back. Not just some of it, almost all of it, plus more. The $40,000 that had been her down payment fund, the fund Ryan had drained to $11.43, the fund that had made her dream of a home feel impossibly far away. It was coming back. And with everything she'd saved on top of it, everything she'd earned through the double shifts and the promotion and the certification, the dream that had seemed like a distant fantasy in a motel room was suddenly, breathtakingly within reach. "Emily," Patricia said, "are you still there?" "I'm here," Emily managed. "I'm sorry, I need a second." "Take all the time you need," Patricia said warmly. "You earned this one the hard way, and you earned it clean. Every dollar of it. Go do something good with it." When Emily told Margaret that night, the older woman didn't cheer. She just looked at Emily for a long moment, and then her eyes filled with tears, and she said, "You're going to buy your house, aren't you?" "I'm going to buy my house," Emily said, and saying it out loud finally after everything broke something open in her, and the two women sat at the kitchen table and cried together. Not the tears of grief that Emily had cried in the parking garage all those months ago, but tears of something Emily had almost forgotten was possible. Joy. Hard-won brick by brick, no one can take it from you, joy. But even in that moment, Emily's family found a way to intrude. She should have known. The settlement was a matter of record, and word traveled through the family the way it always did, distorted and weaponized. Her father called her, and it was the first she'd heard from him since the phone call the night everything ended. His voice was strained. "Emmy," he said, "I heard about the settlement." "Hi, Dad," Emily said carefully. "You bankrupted him, Emmy. Ryan's in real trouble now. He can't cover what the court ordered, and he and Olivia are in a bad way, and I need to understand why you had to take it this far." And Emily, who 6 months ago would have crumbled at the disappointment in her father's voice, felt only a weary sadness. "Dad," she said, "I didn't bankrupt him. He stole from me, and then he lied about it under oath, and the court made him give back what he stole, plus consequences for the lying. That's not me taking it too far. That's a man facing the results of his own actions. And I have to ask you something, and I need you to really think before you answer. When Ryan drained our savings, when he lied to a judge, when he tried to leave me with nothing, where was your phone call then? Where was your concern about things being taken too far? You didn't call me when he stole $40,000 from me. You're calling me now because he has to give it back. What does that tell you about whose side you've been on this whole time?" The silence on the line was long and heavy. "I never wanted to pick sides," Robert finally said. "Dad," Emily said gently, "not picking a side when your daughter is being betrayed is picking a side. It's just the coward's way of doing it, so you don't have to feel responsible for the choice. But you made a choice. You made it a year before I even knew there was a war, and I've made my peace with that. I really have. But I'm not going to sit here and let you tell me I went too far by refusing to be robbed. That's the one thing I won't do. Not anymore." "I'm sorry, Emmy," her father said, and this time his voice broke, and Emily could hear that the apology was real, that whatever else he was a man who was beginning to understand the size of what he'd done. I'm so sorry. I failed you. I know I failed you. And that Emily hadn't been prepared for. She'd been ready for anger, for guilt-tripping, for manipulation. She hadn't been ready for a genuine apology, and it landed somewhere soft that she'd thought she'd armored over. I appreciate you saying that, Dad, she said, and her own voice was unsteady now. I do. It means more than you know, but an apology doesn't put things back the way they were. It can't. Too much happened. What it can do is let us both stop pretending. So thank you. I mean it. And I hope you find a way to live with the choices you made. But I have a life to build now, and I have to go build it. Will I ever see you again? Robert asked. Emily closed her eyes. I don't know, Dad. Maybe someday, but not yet. Not while everyone else is still circling, still lying, still trying to pull me back into the middle of it. I have to protect what I'm building, and right now that means keeping my distance from all of it, even from you. I'm sorry. She hung up, and she sat with the strange, complicated ache of it, the ache of receiving the apology you always wanted from someone you can no longer let all the way back in. Margaret found her there and didn't say anything, just put a kettle on and sat down beside her, and the two of them sat in the comfortable silence of people who understood that some griefs don't need words, only company. In the weeks that followed, Emily poured herself into the final stretch of her plan with a focus that bordered on ferocity. She finished her certification and passed with one of the highest scores the testing center had recorded that year. Her senior coordinator role settled into place, and she discovered to her surprise that she was good at leadership, that the new coordinators she trained looked up to her, that she had a gift for making frightened new employees feel capable and calm, the same way she'd once made frightened families feel calm. She was becoming someone. Not the someone she'd been before, defined by her marriage and her family. A new someone. A someone entirely of her own making. She met with a financial advisor, a sensible woman Margaret had recommended, and together they mapped out the home purchase. With the recovered settlement money, her savings, and her now substantial income, Emily could afford a modest home outright, or nearly so, without stretching herself thin, without putting herself at anyone's mercy. She would not be house poor. She would not be one emergency away from disaster. She would own it, truly own it with a cushion left over. The advisor looked at her file and said, honestly, most people who come through my door with your income have half your discipline and twice your debt. You've done something remarkable here, and you did it fast. Whatever you went through to get here, you turned it into fuel. That's rare. I didn't have a choice, Emily said. Everyone has a choice, the advisor replied. Plenty of people in your situation fall apart and stay fallen. You chose to build. Own that. And Emily was beginning to finally own it. The last obstacle came from a direction she didn't expect. As word of Emily's success spread through the family distorted, as always, the rumor mill shifted its story once more. Now that Emily was clearly not the broken, bitter failure they'd painted her as now that she was thriving, the family needed a new narrative. And the new narrative was that Emily had gotten lucky, that some man must be supporting her, that a woman couldn't possibly have rebuilt this fast on her own, that she'd probably found some wealthy boyfriend and was living off him while pretending to be independent. Because the one thing the Carters could not accept, the one truth too threatening to hold, was that the daughter they'd thrown away had rebuilt her entire life through nothing but her own two hands, her own discipline, her own refusal to be defined by what they'd done to her. Emily heard about this rumor from Rebecca, the same friend who'd warned her at the start. They're saying you have some rich boyfriend bankrolling everything, Rebecca said, half laughing at the absurdity of it. I told your cousin I said Emily works 90 hours a week and studies every night. She doesn't even have time for a boyfriend, but they don't want to hear it. And Emily sitting in Margaret's kitchen, having just finished a 14-hour shift, having just come from studying for a leadership seminar, having built every single dollar of her new life with her own exhausted hands, put her head back and laughed. She laughed until she cried, because there was something almost freeing in the ridiculousness of it, in realizing that no matter what she achieved, her family would find a way to explain it away, to give the credit to anyone but her, because giving her the credit would mean admitting they'd been wrong about her all along. You know what? Emily said to Margaret, wiping her eyes. Let them think there's some rich man. Let them think whatever they need to think. Because I know the truth. You know the truth. And in a few weeks, I'm going to stand in the middle of a house that I bought with money I earned, and I'm going to hold keys in my hand that I paid for myself, and it will not matter one single bit what they choose to believe. The house will be just as real either way. My name on the deed will be just as real. Their lies don't change the deed." Margaret raised her mug. "To the deed," she said. "To the deed," Emily echoed and clinked her mug against Margaret's, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something that was not survival, was not endurance, was not the grim daily discipline of rebuilding. She felt anticipation. She felt the near sweet approach of a dream she had promised herself in a motel room on the worst night of her life, a dream that everyone in her old world had said was impossible, a dream she had refused to surrender. The closing date was set. The papers were drawn. The house was chosen a modest place with good bones and a front porch, and a kitchen full of light. A house that would be hers and hers alone. And as Emily lay in Margaret's spare room the night before, she was to sign her name on the deed and take possession of the first home she had ever truly owned. She thought about the woman who had sat in a motel room months ago with $11.43 to her name and a document titled Evidence. She thought about the promise that woman had made in the dark. "I am going to build a life so solid that no one can ever take it from me again. And I am going to earn a home with my own two hands, and I am going to hold the keys to it." She had done it, not through revenge, not through begging, not through waiting for anyone to save her or apologize or make it right. She had done it brick by brick, shift by shift, dollar by dollar, choice by choice, through the sheer refusal to let the worst thing that ever happened to her become the last thing that defined her. And she had no idea, lying there in the dark on the eve of the greatest victory of her life, that the moment she finally turned her own key in her own front door would set in motion the exact chain of events that would bring every single person who had thrown her away scrambling back to her door, hats in hand, hearts full of need, desperate to reclaim a place in the life they had done everything to destroy. She only knew that tomorrow, for the first time, she would come home to a home that no one on earth could take from her. And that was enough. That was everything. The morning of the closing, Emily's hands shook the same way they'd shaken in the parking garage all those months ago. But this time, it wasn't grief that made them tremble. It was something she didn't have a name for yet. Something between terror and disbelief, and a joy so large it felt physically dangerous to hold. She sat at a long table in the title company's office, and the closing agent slid document after document across to her, and each one had a little tab that said, "Sign here," and Emily signed her name over and over, Emily Carter, Emily Carter, Emily Carter. And each signature was a brick laid into place, and the agent kept talking about escrow and title insurance and property taxes, and Emily heard maybe half of it because the only thing she could truly focus on was the deed. The deed with her name on it. Just her name. Not Emily and Ryan Mitchell, not Emily Carter and anyone, just Emily Carter, sole owner in full. "And this last one," the agent said, "is the one everybody waits for. Once you sign here, the home is legally yours." Emily picked up the pen. And then she stopped, and the agent looked up, a little concerned, and said, "Is everything all right?" "Yeah," Emily whispered. I need a second. I've been waiting a long time for this." And she thought about the woman in the motel room. $11.43, a suitcase, a borrowed room she didn't have yet, a family that had thrown her away. She thought about every double shift, every midnight study session, every rumor she'd swallowed, every phone call she'd survived, every dollar she'd saved when it would have been so much easier to give up. She thought about Margaret draping a blanket over her shoulders. She thought about the promise she'd made in the dark. And then she signed her name, and she pressed the pen down hard enough to leave a mark, and the agent smiled and said the words that Emily would remember for the rest of her life. "Congratulations, Emily, you're a homeowner." Margaret was waiting outside in the lobby because Emily had asked her to come because there was no one else in the world she wanted standing there when it happened. And when Emily walked out holding the folder of papers and the single key the agent had given her, Margaret stood up, and neither of them said anything. and Emily just held up the key, and Margaret pressed both hands to her mouth, and then the two of them were hugging in the middle of the title company lobby, while strangers smiled around them, two women who had become family without a single drop of shared blood between them. "You did it," Margaret said into her hair. "You actually did it." "We did it," Emily said. "No," Margaret said firmly, pulling back to look at her. "I gave you a room and some tea and some hard advice. You did this. Don't you dare give that away. Not even to me. You did this, Emily Carter." They drove to the house separately, Emily leading the way, and when she pulled into the driveway, the driveway of a house she owned, she sat in the car for a moment and just looked at it. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't anything Ryan and Olivia would have posted about. It was a modest 2-bedroom with a front porch and a small yard and honest, ordinary bones. But it was hers. Every board of it, every nail, every square inch of that front porch belonged to Emily Carter and no one else, and no one could ever take it away. She walked up to the front door, and Margaret hung back at the bottom of the steps, understanding without being told that this part Emily needed to do alone. Emily slid the key into the lock, and her hand was shaking again, and she thought absurdly of the keys she'd left on the floor of the apartment the day everything ended, the keys she'd refused to bend down and pick up. She'd thought that day that she'd never hold keys to a home again. She'd thought that woman was finished. She turned the key. The lock clicked, and Emily Carter opened her own front door and stepped for the first time into a home that belonged entirely to her. She didn't cry, which surprised her. She'd expected to sob. Instead, a deep, still peace settled over her, the same stillness she'd felt in the motel room, but warm, this time healed. She walked through the empty rooms, her footsteps echoing on the bare floors, and she touched the walls, and she stood in the kitchen with all its light, and she went out onto the front porch and stood there with her arms wrapped around herself, breathing. Margaret came up the steps and stood beside her. "How does it feel?" she asked. Emily was quiet for a long moment. "You know what's strange?" she finally said. "It's not the house. The house is just wood and drywall. What I feel isn't about the building. It's that for the first time since I was a little girl, there is a place in this world where I am completely safe, where no one can walk in and rearrange my life, where I don't have to be afraid of what someone else might decide. This porch, this door, this lock, they're all mine, and I earned every bit of it. Nobody handed it to me, and nobody can take it back. Do you know how long it's been since I felt safe like this? I don't think I ever have. Not once, not in my whole life." Margaret put an arm around her. "That," she said quietly, "is what a home is supposed to feel like. Most people never understand that because they've never had it taken away from them. You had to lose everything to understand what it actually means. That's a terrible way to learn it, but you learned it, and now nobody can unteach you." Emily moved in that weekend, and she had almost nothing, which turned out to be its own kind of gift, because it meant she got to choose every single thing that came into her home with intention. She bought a bed, a real one, the first bed that had only ever been hers. She bought a small kitchen table with 2 chairs, because she wanted to be ready for the day she'd have someone to share a meal with, but she wasn't in any hurry for that day, and she wanted it to be clear even to herself that the second chair was an invitation, not a need. She hung curtains she'd chosen herself. She painted the kitchen a soft yellow that made the morning light look like something out of a memory of happiness she'd never actually had, but had always longed for. And slowly over the weeks that followed, the house became a home, and the home became a sanctuary, and the sanctuary became the center of a life that was, Emily realized one evening, with something like wonder, actually happy. Not happy in the way she'd once imagined, married with a family who loved her. Happy in a quieter, sturdier way. Happy the way a house with a good foundation is sound. Happy from the ground up. She started to build friendships, real ones, the kind she'd never had time for during her marriage, because Ryan had always subtly discouraged them, had always made her feel like time spent with friends was time stolen from him. Now she had Margaret, of course, who had become something closer to a mother than her own mother had ever been. But she also began to gather other people. There was Denise, a nurse from the hospital, funny and blunt and fiercely loyal, who started coming over on Sunday afternoons. There was Tom and his wife Carol from 2 houses down, retired school teachers who brought over a pie the first week Emily moved in and never really stopped checking on her. There was a whole small constellation of good people, and Emily realized that she was building not just a home, but a life populated by people who had chosen her and whom she had chosen back. "You know what I've figured out?" she said to Denise one Sunday, the two of them sitting on the front porch with iced tea. "For 31 years, I thought family was the people you were born to, the people you were stuck with, the people you had to love no matter what they did to you. And it turns out that's completely backward. Family is the people who show up. Family is Margaret, who gave me a room when my own mother told me to be gracious about my husband sleeping with my sister. Family is you showing up every Sunday with terrible jokes. Family is Tom and Carol and their pie. Blood didn't protect me. Blood betrayed me. But these people who owe me nothing, they're the ones who've had my back." Denise raised her iced tea. "To the family you choose," she said. "To the family you choose," Emily agreed. It was through this new life, this life she'd built from the studs up, that she met Isaiah Brooks. It happened in the most ordinary way imaginable, which was fitting, because Emily had learned to be deeply suspicious of anything that felt like a sweeping romantic movie. Ryan had been a sweeping romantic movie. Ryan had swept her off her feet, moved fast, said all the right things, made her feel like the center of the universe. And it had all been a performance, a beautiful set built over a rotten foundation. So when she met Isaiah, and it was quiet and slow and ordinary, she trusted it precisely because it wasn't a movie. He was an architect, and he'd been hired to consult on a small renovation project at the hospital, updating one of the older wings to be more accessible for elderly patients and families. Emily, in her senior coordinator role, was part of the committee reviewing the plans, and Isaiah came in to present, and Emily's first impression of him was that he was almost frustratingly reasonable. He listened more than he talked. When a doctor on the committee raised a concern about the layout, Isaiah didn't get defensive the way Ryan would have, didn't charm his way past it, didn't dismiss it. He just said, "That's a good point. Let me think about it and come back with a better solution." And then he actually did. "He's not flashy," Emily told Margaret that night, describing the committee meeting, not entirely sure why she was describing it at all. He's solid. He listens. He does what he says he's going to do. It's honestly kind of boring." Margaret hid a smile behind her coffee cup. "Boring," she repeated. "Yes, boring, in a good way. In a way I don't trust yet, because the last time a man was interesting, he burned my whole life down." "Emily," Margaret said gently, "boring that listens and does what it says is not boring. That's what safe feels like when you've only ever known chaos. You've just never experienced a steady man before, so your nervous system reads steady as boring. Give it time. You might find that boring is exactly what you've been starving for your whole life." Emily didn't say anything, but she thought about it for a long time afterward. The renovation project meant Isaiah was around the hospital for several months, and he and Emily fell into an easy, unhurried acquaintance that slowly deepened into a friendship. They'd get coffee to discuss the project and end up talking for an hour about everything and nothing. He was a widower, she learned. His wife had died of cancer 4 years earlier, and he'd raised their teenage daughter alone since then. And when he talked about his late wife, he did so with a tenderness and honesty that Emily had never once heard from Ryan about anything. He didn't pretend the marriage had been perfect. He talked about the hard parts and the good parts with the same steady honesty, and Emily found herself thinking, this is a man who knows how to actually love someone, not perform love. But she was careful. God, she was careful. Every time she felt herself starting to fall, some part of her slammed on the brakes because falling was exactly what had destroyed her before. So she kept Isaiah at arm's length, kept things friendly, kept things safe, and Isaiah, to his enormous credit, never once pushed. He never made her feel like she owed him anything. He never sped things up. He just kept showing up, kept being steady, kept being exactly who he said he was, week after week after week. And slowly, without quite meaning to, Emily started to trust him. The turning point came on an ordinary Tuesday. Isaiah had asked her weeks earlier if she'd want to get dinner sometime, a real dinner, not a coffee to discuss the project dinner, and Emily had said she'd think about it, and she'd been thinking about it ever since thinking herself in circles, because part of her wanted to, and part of her was terrified. And that Tuesday she finally called him and said yes, and then immediately started to panic. She called Margaret. "I said yes to dinner with Isaiah, and now I feel sick. Margaret, what if I can't do this? What if I can't trust anyone ever again? What if Ryan broke that part of me permanently?" And Margaret said something Emily would carry with her forever. "Emily, listen to me. Ryan didn't break your ability to trust. He taught you to see. That's different. Before Ryan, you trusted blindly. You trusted anyone who said the right words, and that made you a target. Now you trust with your eyes open. You've spent months watching this man. You've seen how he handles disappointment, how he talks about his late wife, how he treats his daughter, how he behaves when he thinks no one's evaluating him. That's not blind trust. That's earned trust. That's the only kind of trust that's ever been worth anything. You're not the woman who trusted Ryan. You're a woman who learned how to actually see people. Go to dinner, see what you see, and trust what you see because your eyes are good now. Ryan sharpened them." Emily went to dinner. And it was in fact wonderful, and it was also completely ordinary, and Emily was starting to understand that in her new life, those two things were not opposites. They were the same thing. Wonderful was ordinary done with honesty. Isaiah asked her real questions and listened to the real answers. He talked about his daughter with obvious love. He didn't try to impress her, which was paradoxically the most impressive thing about him. And at the end of the night, he walked her to her car and said, "I had a really nice time. I'd love to do this again whenever you're ready. And if you're never ready, that's okay too. No pressure. I just like being around you." No pressure. Ryan had been nothing but pressure subtle, constant, insidious pressure to be more, do more, give more, prove more. And here was this man saying no pressure and meaning it. Emily drove home that night and sat in her own driveway in front of her own house, and she cried a little. But they were good tears, the tears of someone whose frozen ground was finally starting to thaw. The relationship with Isaiah grew the way Emily's whole new life had grown. Slowly, deliberately, brick by brick. There was no sweeping declaration, no dramatic gesture, no whirlwind. There was just a steady accumulation of ordinary moments that added up over months to something Emily had never actually had before, despite having been married for 6 years. There was trust, real trust, built on watching and testing and seeing the kind of trust that doesn't shatter at the first strong wind because it wasn't built on words in the first place. It was built on evidence, and Emily more than anyone understood the value of evidence. She introduced Isaiah to Margaret, which was in Emily's world the equivalent of introducing him to a parent, more so really. And Margaret, who had watched Emily crawl out of the wreckage and rebuild herself into someone whole, sat with Isaiah for an entire afternoon and grilled him with the gentle relentlessness of a woman who had spent 40 years reading people at their most vulnerable. And at the end of it, she pulled Emily aside in the kitchen and said simply, "He's good, Emily. He's the real thing. I've met 1,000 men in my life, and I can tell the performers from the genuine article, and that man is genuine. Don't let your fear talk you out of him. Your fear kept you safe when you needed it to, but you don't need it anymore. Not with him." "How do you know?" Emily asked. "How can you be sure I was sure about Ryan?" "You weren't sure about Ryan," Margaret said. "You were in love with Ryan, which is a completely different thing. You wanted Ryan to be who he pretended to be, so you didn't look too hard. But Isaiah, you've done nothing but look hard at him for months. You've been trying to find the crack, the lie, the performance because you've been waiting for it, bracing for it. And you haven't found it. Not because you didn't look, because it isn't there. That's how I know. And I think deep down that's how you know too. You're just scared to admit it because admitting it means being vulnerable again. And vulnerability is the exact thing that got you hurt. But Emily, you can't build a life worth living without it. A fortress with no doors isn't a home, it's a prison. Those words landed hard because Emily knew they were true. She had built herself a fortress after Ryan, and the fortress had saved her. But Margaret was right that a fortress you never let anyone into stops being protection and starts being a cage. And so Emily made a decision, the bravest decision she'd made since the night she'd written the word evidence at the top of a document in a cheap motel. She decided to let Isaiah in, slowly, carefully, with her eyes wide open, but in. And it was good. It was so good it sometimes frightened her, and when it frightened her, she'd learned to sit with the fear instead of running from it to remind herself that fear was just a smoke alarm, and not every alarm meant fire. Isaiah met her exactly where she was. He never pushed past a boundary. He celebrated her independence instead of feeling threatened by it, which was so foreign to Emily that at first she kept waiting for it to be a trick. Ryan had needed her to be smaller, so he could feel bigger. Isaiah seemed to actively delight in her being fully herself in her home. She'd bought her career, she'd built her strength, she'd forged. "Doesn't it bother you?" she asked him once, genuinely curious. "That I don't need you, that I built all of this without you, that I'm completely fine on my own?" Isaiah looked at her like she'd asked something that had never occurred to him. "Why would that bother me?" he said. "Emily, the fact that you don't need me is exactly why I know that anything between us is real. If you needed me, I'd never be sure whether you were with me because you wanted to be or because you were afraid to be alone. But you're not afraid to be alone. You've proven that. You built a whole life alone, so if you choose to let me into it, I know it's because you actually want me there. That's not a threat to me. That's the only kind of love I'd ever want, the kind that's a choice, not a need." And Emily, hearing that, understood that she had found something genuinely rare. Not a man who completed her because she was already complete. She'd made herself complete brick by brick. She'd found a man who wanted to stand beside something whole rather than prop up something broken. And that made all the difference in the world. Her life in that season was fuller and more peaceful than it had ever been. She had her home safe and hers. She had her career thriving with more promotions on the horizon and a reputation as one of the best coordinators the hospital had ever had. She had her chosen family, Margaret and Denise and Tom and Carol, and the whole warm constellation of people who had shown up for her. And now she had Isaiah steady and honest and genuinely good, moving through her life at the careful pace they'd both agreed on. She thought about her old family less and less. The phone calls had mostly stopped after she'd made her boundaries clear, and the silence, which she'd once feared would feel like a wound, actually felt like a door that had finally mercifully closed. She wasn't waiting for their apology anymore. She wasn't organizing her happiness around whether they approved. Margaret had been right months ago at that kitchen table. Freedom wasn't getting even. Freedom was not needing them at all. And Emily was free. One evening, sitting on her front porch with Isaiah as the light faded, Emily said something she'd never said out loud before. "You know, the day I found out about Ryan and Olivia, I thought my life was over. I remember sitting in my car in that parking garage, thinking I would never be happy again, that the best of my life was behind me, that I was 31 and finished." She turned to look at him. "And it turns out that was the day my real life started. Everything before that was a lie I was living inside without knowing it. Everything after that I built with my own hands, and it's real, all of it. This porch, this house, Margaret, you. It's the first real thing I've ever had, and I would never have found it if he hadn't blown up the fake thing. Isn't that strange? The worst thing that ever happened to me turned out to be the thing that saved me." Isaiah reached over and took her hand, and he didn't say anything profound because that wasn't his way. He just held her hand and looked out at the yard with her two people who had both been broken and had both rebuilt, sitting in the quiet of a life that Emily had made with her own strength. And it was enough. It was more than enough. What Emily didn't know, as she sat on that porch in the fading light, was that her peaceful, hard-won, self-built life was about to be tested one final time. Because she'd been living so fully in her new world that she'd almost forgotten about the old one. She'd almost forgotten about the people who had thrown her away. And they had not forgotten about her. They had simply been waiting, circling at a distance, and they were about to be handed the one thing that would bring them all rushing back to the door of the very home they'd sworn she'd never build. She took a picture that evening. Just a simple photo of her living room, warm and lit and beautiful. The yellow walls glowing in the lamplight, a vase of flowers on the little table, the whole space radiating the peace and safety she'd fought so hard for. And she posted it with a simple caption: "Home. Finally home." It was such a small thing, such an ordinary human thing to want to share a moment of happiness. She had no idea that this single photo, this innocent little picture of the sanctuary she'd built, was about to reach the exact people she'd worked so hard to leave behind, and that when it did, it would light a fuse that would bring her entire past crashing back through the door she'd finally, after everything, learned to lock. The first call came 2 days after Emily posted the photo. She almost didn't recognize the number, and then she did, and her stomach dropped because it was her mother's number, the number she hadn't seen light up her phone in nearly 7 months. She stared at it ringing on the kitchen counter, and something old and instinctive tightened in her chest, the reflex of a lifetime, the pull to answer, to appease, to keep the peace. She let it ring. It went to voicemail. And then, 30 seconds later, it rang again. When it rang a third time, she finally picked up, not out of weakness, but because she wanted to know. She wanted to understand what could possibly have brought her mother back after all this silence. "Emily?" Diane's voice was bright, warm, almost tearful with relief, as if no time had passed, as if the last 7 months of silence had been Emily's doing and not the natural result of everything her mother had chosen. "Oh, honey, it's so good to hear your voice. I've missed you so much. We all have." "Hi, Mom," Emily said carefully, keeping her voice level. "What can I do for you?" "Do for me?" "Nothing, sweetheart. I saw your picture, your home. Emily, it's beautiful. It's just beautiful. I always knew you'd land on your feet. I always said that girl is strong, she's going to be just fine. And look at you, a whole home of your own. I'm so proud of you." Emily stood very still in her kitchen in the home she'd bought with her own hands, and she listened to her mother claim to have always believed in her, and she thought about the actual words her mother had used 7 months ago. "Don't be dramatic. Be the bigger person. You won't be welcome in this family anymore." She thought about the rumors her mother had spread, that Emily was cold, that Emily had driven Ryan away, that Emily was living off some rich boyfriend. And now suddenly her mother had always known she'd be fine, had always been proud. "That's interesting," Emily said, "because the last time we spoke you told me I wouldn't be welcome in the family if I didn't drop the lawsuit. And now you're proud of me. What changed, Mom?" There was the briefest pause, a tiny hitch, and then Diane recovered with the smoothness of a woman who had spent a lifetime managing difficult conversations by refusing to acknowledge them. "Oh, Emily, that was all just a hard time. Emotions were running high. We say things we don't mean when we're hurting, but that's all in the past now. Family is family. And I think it's time we all put this behind us and came back together. Life's too short, honey. I don't want to lose my daughter over a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding. That was the word her mother had chosen for a year of covering up an affair, for choosing Olivia's betrayal over Emily's dignity, for casting her out. A misunderstanding. "Mom," Emily said slowly, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me just this once. If I hadn't posted that photo, if you thought I was still struggling, still broke, still sleeping in Margaret's spare room, would you be calling me right now?" The silence that followed answered the question more completely than any words could have. "That's not fair," Diane finally said, and her voice had lost some of its warmth. "A mother doesn't need a reason to call her daughter." "A mother doesn't," Emily agreed. "But you did. You needed a reason, and the reason was a photograph of a house you suddenly realized I'd managed to buy." "Mom, I'm not angry. I want you to hear that. I'm not even hurt anymore, which took me a long time to get to. I'm just clear. And what's clear to me is that you went silent when you thought I had nothing, and you came back the moment you saw I had something. And I think we both know what that means." "Emily, please," Diane said. And now there was an edge of desperation creeping in, that Emily hadn't expected a note that told her there was more to this call than a mother missing her daughter. "Please don't do this. Things have been very hard for all of us. Your father's heart isn't good. And Ryan and Olivia, they're going through such a difficult time, and I just thought if we could all come together, if the family could just be a family again, everything would be so much easier." And there it was. The real reason poking through the performance of maternal love like a bone through skin. Everything would be so much easier. Not better for Emily, easier for them. Emily had been in her family long enough to translate fluently. This wasn't reconciliation. This was recruitment. They needed something. And Emily had suddenly visibly become a person with resources, a person who might be useful again. "Mom," Emily said gently, because she genuinely didn't want to be cruel. "I hope Dad's okay. I mean that, and I hope you all find your way through whatever you're going through. But I'm not the answer to your problems. I stopped being the family's problem solver the day you all decided I wasn't worth telling the truth to. I have my own life now, a good one, and I built it specifically so that I would never again be dependent on the approval or the goodwill of people who threw me away. I'm not going to unbuild that just because you saw a nice picture. I'm sorry, I really am, but my answer is no." "You haven't even heard what we're asking," Diane protested. "I don't need to," Emily said, "because whatever it is, the answer is the same. Take care of yourself, Mom. I mean that too." She hung up, and she stood in her kitchen and she waited for the crushing wave of guilt that a lifetime of conditioning had trained her to expect. But it didn't come. Instead, she felt something almost like relief, because she'd just proven to herself in real time that she could hear her mother's voice absorb her mother's manipulation and still hold her ground. The woman in the parking garage could never have done that, but this woman could. This woman had built a foundation strong enough to stand on. She called Margaret immediately, because that was what she did. Now she brought the hard things to the people who'd earned the right to help her carry them. "My mother called," she said. "She saw the house. She's suddenly proud of me. And she wants the family to come back together, and there's something underneath it, something they need. I could hear it, but she wouldn't say what." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel?" "That's the strange part," Emily said. "I feel fine. I said no, and I feel fine. I keep waiting to feel guilty, and it's not coming." "That," Margaret said warmly, "is the sound of a woman who's finally free. Guilt is the leash they use to keep you in line, Emily. And you just noticed the leash isn't attached to anything anymore. But listen to me, this isn't over. When someone like your mother comes back after seeing you have something and there's a need underneath it, that she won't name that need doesn't go away because you said no once. It gets more desperate. Be ready. They'll come at you from other directions. Brace yourself." Margaret was right, of course. She was always right about these things because she'd lived long enough to see every variety of human desperation. The next contact came from Olivia 3 days later, and it was a text message, long and rambling, and Emily read it standing in her living room. Her sister wrote that she'd seen the house, that she was happy for Emily truly, and that she knew she had no right to ask for anything, but that things had gotten so bad, and she didn't know where else to turn. And then it came out, the thing underneath everything, the thing Diane had refused to name. Olivia was pregnant. She was pregnant with Ryan's child, and Ryan had lost his job, and the settlement Emily had won had wiped out their savings, and they were about to lose the apartment, the very apartment with the honey oak floors Emily had chosen, and Olivia was scared, and she was asking Sister if Emily could help them. Just for a little while, just until they got back on their feet. Emily sat down slowly on her new couch in her new home and read the message twice. And a complicated storm of feelings moved through her. There was buried somewhere deep a flicker of the old sisterly instinct, the reflex to protect Olivia that had been trained into her since childhood, since she was the big sister who'd looked after her little sister, who'd defended her, who'd loved her. That flicker was real, and Emily didn't hate herself for feeling it. But over and around that flicker was something clearer and stronger, the hard-won wisdom of everything she'd survived. She thought about what it would mean to say yes, to let Ryan and Olivia move into her orbit, to give them money to become the safety net for the two people who had destroyed her life. She thought about how it would go. She'd helped them once and it would never be enough, and there would be another crisis and another, and she would become exactly what she'd been before, the family's endlessly renewable resource, the one who gave and gave while everyone else took. She thought about the apartment with the honey oak floors and how they were about to lose the very home they'd built on the ruins of hers, and she felt no triumph in that, only a deep and weary recognition of how these things go. You cannot build a lasting home on a stolen foundation. It was always going to collapse. It was just a matter of time. She typed her response carefully, and she made sure every word was true, and every word was kind, because she was not interested in cruelty, only in clarity. "Olivia," she wrote, "I'm sorry you're scared. I know what that feels like because I felt exactly that kind of fear the night I found you in my bed with my husband, with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. I want you to sit with that for a second. The fear you're feeling right now is the same fear you handed to me, and nobody helped me. Not you, not Mom, not Dad, not Ryan. I was completely alone, and I built my way out of it with my own 2 hands. I'm not telling you that to be cruel. I'm telling you because you're about to have a child, and you need to learn the thing that I had to learn the hard way. You cannot build a life by taking from other people. You have to build it yourself. So no, I won't be giving you money, and I won't be letting you and Ryan into my life. Not because I hate you, because I love the life I built too much to hand it to the people who taught me how much it hurts to have your life taken. I hope you find your feet. I hope your child is healthy. But you're going to have to do it the way I did, on your own." She sent it, and then she set the phone down and she went out onto her porch, and she breathed, and Denise happened to be walking up the steps for their Sunday visit, and she took one look at Emily's face and said, "Okay, what happened? Sit. Tell me everything." And Emily did. She told Denise about her mother, about Olivia, about the pregnancy, about the message she'd just sent. And Denise, blunt and fierce and loyal, listened to all of it, and at the end she said, "You know what gets me? The sheer nerve. This girl slept with your husband, helped your parents lie to you for a year, and now that she's pregnant and broke, she's texting you sister to sister for a handout. Sister to sister. She lost the right to that phrase in your bedroom. And you responded with more grace than I could have mustered in 100 years. I'd have sent back one word, and it wouldn't have been a nice one." Emily laughed, despite herself. "I thought about it," she admitted. "But cruelty would have made me feel powerful for about 5 minutes, and then I'd have felt sick. This way I feel clean. I told her the truth. The truth is enough." "The truth is enough," Denise agreed, shaking her head in admiration. "God, you've become somebody you know that the woman I met a year ago couldn't have done that. She'd have cried and given them the money and hated herself. You've changed." "I had to," Emily said quietly. "The old me almost didn't survive. This is who I had to become to make it out." But her old family was not a group that accepted no gracefully. Emily should have known that. Diane and Olivia had made their requests, and Emily had declined clearly and kindly, and any healthy person would have accepted that and moved on. But the Carters were not healthy, and desperation makes people worse, not better, and so instead of accepting her boundaries, they escalated. It started with the messages. Dozens of them from her mother, from Olivia, from aunts and cousins Emily hadn't heard from in years, all of them suddenly deeply invested in the idea of family unity, all of them scolding Emily for her coldness, her selfishness, her refusal to help her own pregnant sister. The narrative had shifted again the way it always did. Emily, who had asked for nothing but to be left in peace, was once again the villain. Emily had money and wouldn't share it. Emily was punishing her family. Emily had let success go to her head. The woman who'd built a home from nothing was being recast in real time as a selfish, rich woman turning her back on struggling relatives. Emily muted most of them, blocked the worst of them, and tried to hold on to her peace. But the harassment moved from her phone into her actual life, and that was where it crossed a line that Emily would not allow anyone to cross. Ryan showed up at the hospital. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and Emily was at the coordinator station doing her job. The job she'd built through blood and discipline, when she looked up and saw him walking down the corridor toward her, and for a moment her whole body went cold with the old fear. He looked different, diminished. The confident, charming man who'd smiled at her from her own bed was gone, and in his place was someone anxious and rumpled and desperate. And Emily understood in an instant that whatever life he'd built with Olivia had chewed him up and spat him out. "Emily," he said, stopping at the station, "we need to talk." "You need to leave," Emily said, and she was proud of how steady her voice was. "This is my workplace. You can't be here." 5 minutes, Ryan said. "That's all I'm asking. After everything, you can give me 5 minutes." "After everything," Emily repeated, and something in her almost laughed at the audacity. "After everything, Ryan, I don't owe you 5 seconds. But since you're here, let me be very clear so there's no confusion. You need to leave this hospital right now, and you need to never come back. Whatever you came to ask me, the answer is no." "You don't even know what I'm going to say," Ryan said. And there was a flash of the old arrogance, the old certainty that if he could just talk, just charm, just explain, he could get what he wanted, because that had always worked before. "I know exactly what you're going to say," Emily said. "You're going to tell me things are hard. You're going to remind me of the years we were together, the good ones, and ask me to remember what we had. You're going to tell me that whatever happened, we were family once, and family helps each other. And then you're going to ask me for money or a place to stay, or help dressed up as reconciliation. That's the script, Ryan. I've heard it from Mom, and I've heard it from Olivia, and now I'm hearing it from you. And the answer is the same to all 3 of you. No. Now leave before I call security." Ryan's face changed, then the desperation curdling into something uglier, and he leaned in and his voice dropped, and he said, "You think you're better than us now, don't you? Sitting there in your little house playing the victim, acting like you're so much stronger than everybody. But you're nothing without me, Emily. You were nothing when I met you, and you'll be nothing when this all falls apart. That house, that job, none of it makes you a better person than the rest of us." And Emily, hearing this, feeling the old poison of his words, trying to find the old wounds, discovered something wonderful. The wounds were gone. Where his words would once have found soft bleeding places to sink into, they found only healed, solid ground. Because she'd rebuilt herself so completely that his cruelty had nowhere left to land. "You're right," Emily said calmly, and Ryan blinked, thrown by her agreement. "The house doesn't make me a better person than you. The job doesn't either. You want to know what makes me a better person than you, Ryan? I've never once betrayed someone who trusted me. I've never emptied someone's savings and lied about it under oath. I've never destroyed someone's whole world to satisfy myself and then blamed them for it. That's what makes me a better person, not the house. The house is just where I keep my integrity now that I finally have room for it." She picked up the phone at the station. "You have 30 seconds to walk out that door on your own, or I call security and you get escorted out and banned from the property. Your choice. I'd choose fast." Ryan stared at her, and Emily could see him searching for the woman he used to be able to control. The woman who folded, who appeased, who made herself smaller to keep him comfortable. And he couldn't find her. She wasn't there anymore. And something in his face collapsed as he realized it, as he understood that the person standing in front of him was a stranger, a stronger stranger, someone entirely beyond his reach. He turned and walked away without another word, and Emily set down the phone, and her hands weren't even shaking. But the incident scared her not for herself, but because it told her how far they were willing to go. Coming to her workplace, cornering her. And if Ryan would do that, what came next? So Emily did what she'd learned to do, the thing that had saved her once already. She documented everything. She wrote down the date, the time, exactly what Ryan had said, the fact that he'd come to her workplace uninvited. She reported it to hospital security and had them note it formally. And then she called someone she hadn't spoken to in months, but who'd become a strange kind of ally. She called Patricia Vance, her attorney. "Patricia," Emily said, "I think I might need your help again. My ex-husband came to my workplace today. My whole family has been harassing me nonstop since I bought my house. I've got dozens of messages, and Ryan showing up in person threatening me that scared me. What are my options?" Patricia's voice sharpened into the focused, protective mode Emily remembered. "First, are you safe right now?" "I'm safe." "He left when I threatened to call security." "Good. Here's what we do. You document everything, which, knowing you, you've already started." "Already done," Emily confirmed. Patricia actually chuckled. "Of course it is. Emily Carter, keeper of records. All right, if this continues, if he shows up again, if the harassment escalates, we have a very strong case for a restraining order. Coming to your workplace, the threatening language, the pattern of harassment from multiple family members, that's a documented pattern of behavior. Courts take workplace intrusion very seriously. You are not powerless here, not even close. The same documentation that got your money back is going to protect your peace now. Keep records of every single contact, screenshots, dates, times, witnesses, and the second anyone crosses a physical line again, you call me and we go to court, and we make it legally impossible for them to come near you. You understand, you have options, you have power, use it. And Emily did. When the harassment continued, when Olivia showed up at her home one evening uninvited, standing on the porch of the house Emily had built, crying and demanding to be let in, demanding that Emily help her, screaming that Emily was heartless, that she was abandoning her own pregnant sister. Emily didn't open the door. She stood on the other side of it, the locked door of her own home, and she said through it calmly, "Olivia, you need to leave. You're on my property and you weren't invited. And if you don't go, I'm going to have to call the police. I don't want to do that, but I will. This is my home, and you don't get to bring your chaos to my door." "Your home!" Olivia shrieked from the porch. "You care more about this house than you do about your own family. What kind of person are you?" And Emily, standing behind her locked door, felt the old guilt try to rise, and she pushed it down because she'd learned that guilt was just the leash, and the leash wasn't attached to anything anymore. "I care about this home," she said, "because it's the only place I've ever been safe, and I care about the family I built, the people who actually love me, who never asked me to bleed for them. You're not that family, Olivia. You stopped being that a long time ago. Now please leave, or I'm making the call." Olivia didn't leave. She kept screaming, kept pounding on the door, kept making a scene loud enough that Tom and Carol came out onto their own porch 2 houses down, concerned, and that was the moment Emily understood that the boundary she'd drawn in words was going to have to become a boundary drawn in law. She called the police. She didn't want to. But she did it because protecting her peace was more important than avoiding the discomfort of the moment. And when the officers arrived and calmly asked Olivia to leave and took down a report, and Emily gave them the documentation she'd been keeping, the pattern of harassment written down in careful, dated detail. One of the officers looked at her file and said, "Ma'am, with a record like this, you'd have solid grounds for a restraining order if you wanted to pursue one." "I think I do," Emily said quietly. "I think it's time." The next weeks were a blur of legal filings and court dates, and Patricia guided her through all of it with the same fierce competence she'd shown in the divorce. Emily filed for and was granted restraining orders against both Ryan and Olivia, orders that legally required them to stay away from her home and her workplace, that made it a crime for them to contact her or come near her. And standing in the courthouse as the orders were granted, Emily felt no joy exactly, but something quieter and deeper, a sense of a door finally permanently closing. The people who had thrown her away had come back not with love, but with need, not with apology, but with demand, and when she'd said no, they'd tried to force their way back into her life anyway. And now the law itself stood between them and her. Now, for the first time, they were the ones on the outside, and the wall between them was one they could not climb. One Emily had built with the same tools that had built everything else in her new life: documentation, discipline, and the refusal to ever again let anyone convince her that she owed them access to the life she'd earned. Her father was the only one who didn't harass her. He called once after the restraining orders, and his voice was heavy and old and sad. "Emmy," he said, "I heard about the orders against Ryan and Olivia. I'm not calling to argue. I wanted to say I understand, and I'm sorry it came to that. I'm sorry it came to any of it." "Thank you, Dad," Emily said, and she meant it. "Your mother thinks you're being cruel," Robert went on, "but I don't. I think you're finally protecting yourself the way somebody should have protected you a long time ago, the way I should have, and I didn't, and that's on me. It'll always be on me." His voice broke. "I just wanted you to know that at least one person in this family sees what really happened, and it's you who was wronged, Emmy. Not the other way around. Whatever anybody says, it was you." And Emily, hearing the one thing she'd needed to hear from the very beginning, finally from the one person whose acknowledgement still meant something, closed her eyes and let a few quiet tears fall. "That means everything to me, Dad," she said. "It really does. Thank you for finally saying it." "Will you be okay?" he asked. "Out there on your own, with all of them so angry. Emily looked around her home, the yellow kitchen, the warm living room, the front porch, all of it hers, all of it earned, all of it safe. She thought about Margaret and Denise and Tom and Carol and Isaiah, the family she'd chosen, the family that had chosen her. She thought about how far she'd come from the woman in the parking garage with $11 and no one to call. "Dad," she said softly, "I'm not on my own. That's the thing nobody in the family ever understood. I lost all of you and I thought that meant I had nothing. But I didn't lose everything. I lost the people who were never really for me in the first place. And in their place, I found people who are. So no, I'm not on my own. I'm more surrounded by love than I've ever been in my life. It's just that none of it comes from the people I was born to. It comes from the people I chose, and they'd never show up at my door screaming. They show up with pie and Sunday visits and steady hands. That's what family is supposed to be. I finally have it. I just had to lose the other thing to find it." There was a long silence on the line. And then her father said, "I'm glad, Emmy. I'm glad you have that. You deserve it. You always did." And then quietly, "I won't call again unless you want me to. I'll respect your peace. It's the least I can do. But I'll be thinking about you every day. And if you ever want your old man, you know where I am." "I know, Dad," Emily said. "Thank you." And she hung up and she stood in her home, and for the first time she understood that some relationships don't end in a clean break or a full reconciliation, but in something in between, a quiet, respectful distance, an acknowledgement of harm that can't be undone, paired with a love that, however flawed, was real. Her father had failed her. He knew it, and in his knowing it, in his finally speaking the truth, there was not a healing exactly, but a kind of peace. The peace of not having to fight anymore, the peace of being at long last believed. That evening Isaiah came over, and Emily told him everything. The calls, the harassment, Ryan at the hospital, Olivia on the porch, the restraining orders, her father's apology. And Isaiah listened to all of it, steady as ever. And at the end, he didn't try to fix it or minimize it or tell her how she should feel. He just said, "You handled all of that with more strength than most people have in their whole bodies. And I want you to know something. Whatever comes next, whatever they try, you're not facing it alone. Not because you can't handle it alone, you obviously can, but because you shouldn't have to. That's what I'm here for, not to rescue you, just to stand next to you while you rescue yourself, which you always do." And Emily, hearing this, looked at the man in front of her, this steady, honest, ordinary, extraordinary man, and she felt the last of her fear finally let go. She'd built a home no one could take. She'd built a family that had chosen her. She'd built a self that couldn't be broken by anyone's cruelty or need. And now, standing in the center of all of it, she understood that the people who had thrown her away were finally truly on the outside of a life they could never touch. Not because she'd locked them out in anger, but because she'd built something so solid, so real, so genuinely hers, that there was simply no way for them to get in. The restraining orders brought a silence that Emily had almost forgotten was possible. For the first time in months, her phone stopped buzzing with accusations. Her porch stayed empty. Her workplace stayed her own. And in that silence, Emily discovered something she hadn't expected. The quiet wasn't cold. It wasn't lonely. It was the sound of a life finally at peace with itself. But peace, she was learning, wasn't the end of the story. It was the ground on which the rest of the story got to be built. The seasons turned, and Emily's life settled into a rhythm that would have been unimaginable to the woman in the parking garage. She woke each morning in her own bed, in her own home, and she made coffee in her yellow kitchen. And she went to a job she was good at, where people respected her and looked up to her and depended on her. She came home each evening to a house that was quiet and safe and entirely hers. And on the weekends, her chosen family filled that house with the kind of warmth Emily had spent her whole life longing for without ever quite finding it. It was on one of those weekends, nearly a year after the restraining orders, that Isaiah asked her to marry him. He didn't do it with a grand gesture because that wasn't who he was, and it wasn't what Emily needed. He did it on her front porch on an ordinary evening after they'd been together long enough that Emily had finally fully let him all the way in. He took her hand and he said, "Emily, I've watched you build the most extraordinary life I've ever seen out of the worst thing that ever happened to you. And I don't want to complete your life because it's already complete. You did that yourself. I just want to be part of it. I want to be the person who's standing beside you for whatever comes next. Not because you need me, because I hope you want me. Will you marry me? And Emily, who had once been so certain she would never trust another man as long as she lived, looked at this steady, honest, ordinary, extraordinary man, and she didn't feel the terror she'd expected to feel at this moment. She felt something else entirely. She felt safe. She felt chosen. She felt like a woman who had learned the difference between the love that consumes you and the love that stands beside you, and who had finally, after everything, found the second kind. "Yes," she said. "But I need you to understand something first. This house, this life, everything I built it doesn't become yours when we get married. It stays mine. Not because I don't trust you, because I earned it, and it's the proof that I can survive anything, and I never want to give that up. So we build a life together. But this stays mine." Isaiah smiled, and there wasn't a flicker of hurt or offense in it, only understanding. "Emily," he said, "I would never ask you to give up the one thing that proves you're unbreakable. That house isn't just where you live. It's who you became. I don't want to own it. I just want to be lucky enough to be welcomed into it. That's all I've ever wanted." And that was the difference in the end between Isaiah and everyone who had come before. He didn't want to take anything from her. He only wanted to add to what she'd already built. He understood that a home built by one person could still make room for another, without ever ceasing to belong to the one who built it. They married in the small backyard of the house Emily had bought with her own hands. It was a modest wedding, exactly the kind Emily wanted. Margaret stood beside her in the place of honor that would traditionally have gone to a mother, because Margaret was in every way that mattered the mother Emily had chosen and been chosen by. Denise was there, and Tom and Carol and Isaiah's teenage daughter, who had come to love Emily with the fierce loyalty of a girl who'd lost her own mother, and found in Emily not a replacement, but something new and good. Patricia Vance even came the attorney who had become an unlikely friend, and she raised a glass and said, "In 26 years of practicing law, I've watched a lot of people go through the worst days of their lives. And I've never watched anyone turn the worst day into the best life quite like this woman did." To Emily, who proved that the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Emily's father was not there. She had thought long and hard about whether to invite him, and in the end she had called him, and they had talked, and they had agreed together that it was better this way. Not out of anger anymore, just out of a mutual quiet understanding that some distances once created are kinder left in place. But before the wedding, he had sent her a letter handwritten, and in it he had said the things a father should say, and he had ended it with a line that Emily would keep for the rest of her life. "You built something none of us had the courage to build, Emmy. You built a life on honesty, and that's stronger than anything the rest of us ever made on our lies. I'm proud of you. I'm sorry I ever gave you a reason to doubt that I could be." She read it on her wedding morning, and she cried, and then she folded it carefully and put it away, and she went and married a good man in the backyard of a home she owned, surrounded by a family she had chosen, and it was without question the happiest day of her life. As for the others, Emily heard about them only in fragments, the way you hear about a weather system passing through a distant part of the country. She learned eventually that Ryan and Olivia had not made it. The pregnancy, the financial collapse, the loss of the apartment with the honey oak floors, the crushing weight of a life built on a stolen foundation. It had all been too much, and they had turned on each other the way people do when the thing that brought them together was never love in the first place, but only mutual selfishness. They'd separated before the baby was even a year old. Ryan, last Emily heard, had moved to another state, chasing another fresh start, running from the wreckage, the way he always ran. Olivia had moved back in with their parents, a single mother now raising a child alone in the house Emily had grown up in. And Emily felt when she heard all of this not triumph, not vindication, something quieter and sadder and more human. She felt sorrow for the child, an innocent who hadn't asked to be born into any of it. She felt a distant, complicated grief for the sister Olivia had been before she became the woman on Emily's porch, and she felt most of all a profound and settled gratitude that she had gotten out, that she had refused to give them access to her life, because if she had said yes, if she had let them in, if she had become their safety net, she would have gone down with the ship. Her peace, her home, her happiness, all of it would have been sacrificed to prop up two people who would have taken everything and given nothing, and blamed her when it collapsed anyway. "Do you ever feel guilty?" Denise asked her once on one of their Sunday afternoons years into Emily's new life. "About Olivia raising that baby alone in your parents' house while you're over here living your best life." Emily thought about it honestly, because Denise deserved an honest answer, and because Emily had asked herself the same question in the quiet of the night more than once. "I used to," she admitted. "For a long time, part of me felt like maybe I should have helped, like maybe a better person would have forgiven them and taken them in and made everything okay. But you know what I finally figured out?" She looked out at her yard at the porch at the home she'd built. "Olivia's situation isn't my doing. It's the natural result of the choices she made. She took my husband. She helped destroy my life. She built her whole world on my ruins, and that world collapsed the way anything built on a stolen foundation eventually does. Me refusing to rescue her didn't cause that collapse. Her own choices did. And if I had rescued her, all I would have done is teach her that she could keep making those choices forever, without consequences. The kindest thing I ever did for Olivia, honestly, was let her face the truth of what she'd done, even though it broke her. Because maybe someday out of that breaking she'll build something real, on her own, the way I had to." "That's the only way anybody ever really changes." Denise was quiet for a moment. "That's either the wisest thing I've ever heard or the coldest," she said finally. Emily laughed. "It's both," she said. "That's what nobody tells you about healing. The wisest thing and the coldest thing are sometimes the exact same thing. Love with boundaries looks like cruelty to people who only ever knew you without them." And there it was, the thing Emily had spent 2 years of her life learning at the highest possible cost. She had grown up believing that love meant endless self-sacrifice, that a good daughter, a good wife, a good sister gave and gave and gave until there was nothing left, and that setting a limit, protecting yourself, saying no, was selfish and cold and unloving. Her whole family had been built on that lie, a machine that ran on the self-sacrifice of whoever was too kind to say no. And Emily had been that person, the one who kept the machine running, until the day the machine finally consumed her whole and spat her out with $11 in a suitcase. And in the ruins of that, she had learned the truth, that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's just a slow surrender, that you cannot pour from an empty vessel, and that protecting your own peace isn't selfish. It's the only way you have anything left to give the people who actually deserve it. She'd learned that the people who call you cruel for having boundaries are almost always the people who benefited from you not having any. And she'd learned, most importantly, that a home, a life, a self worth having is one you build with your own hands on the solid ground of honesty and hard work and self-respect, and that anything built on lies and betrayal and taking from others, no matter how beautiful it looks from the outside, is always, always going to collapse. Years later, Emily would sit on that same front porch, older now, with Isaiah's hand in hers and the sounds of their life filling the house behind them, and she would think about the woman she'd been in the parking garage, shaking broken, certain her life was over. And she would want more than anything to reach back through time and tell that woman what she knew now. She would tell her that the betrayal that felt like the end was actually the beginning, that the family who threw her away had done her the accidental favor of freeing her from a life that was slowly killing her, that the rock bottom of that motel room, $11.43, and a document titled Evidence, was not the bottom of a grave, but the foundation of a house. She would tell her that every double shift, every midnight study session, every dollar saved, every boundary, held every no spoken clearly, and without apology was a brick, and that one day she would stand inside a home built entirely of those bricks and understand that no one could ever take it from her because no one had ever given it to her in the first place. She would tell her that she would learn the difference between the family you're born to and the family you choose, and that the second kind, the kind that shows up with pie and Sunday visits and steady hands, is the only kind that ever really counted. She would tell her that a good man would come along not to rescue her because she'd already rescued herself, but to stand beside her in a life she'd already made whole. and she would tell her that the greatest victory of her life would not be making the people who hurt her regret what they'd done, because you cannot control whether the people who hurt you ever feel sorry, and organizing your life around their regret is just another way of letting them control you. The greatest victory, she would tell that shaking woman in the parking garage, is building a life so peaceful, so full, so genuinely and completely your own, that their approval simply stops mattering, that their apology stops being something you need, that the door they threw you out of stops being a door you ever want to walk back through. Success is not revenge. Success is not even forgiveness exactly. Success is freedom. The freedom of no longer needing anything at all from the people who proved they were never really for you. The people who once threw Emily Carter away spent the rest of their lives on the outside of the home she built, looking in through a window at a life they could never touch, wanting back into something they had done everything in their power to destroy. And Emily never once opened that door for them, not out of hatred. She'd let the hatred go a long time ago, because hatred was just another leash, another way of staying tied to people who didn't deserve the space in her heart. She kept the door closed out of something stronger and cleaner than hatred. She kept it closed out of love, love for the life she'd built, love for the people who'd earned their place inside it, love at long last for herself. Because Emily Carter had learned the one truth that had cost her everything and given her everything in return. A home is not the walls or the roof or the address. A home is what you build when you finally understand that you are worth protecting. And the home she built brick by brick through betrayal and abandonment and the hardest years of her life was a home that no one could ever take from her again. Not her husband, not her sister, not her mother or her father or anyone who came knocking with need dressed up as love. She had earned it. She had built it. It was hers, and she would hold the keys to it, her own keys for the rest of her life. That was the ending. That was the whole point. Home is not given. Home is earned. And the woman who earns it brick by brick through her own courage and resilience and unbreakable self-respect builds something that will stand long after the people who doubted her have faded into the distance watching from the outside, understanding at last, too late, exactly what they threw away. Emily Carter closed the door on her past forever, and she never once looked back, because everything she would ever need was already inside waiting warm, and finally, completely hers. Long after the door had closed on her, past life had a way of circling back, not to reopen old wounds, but to show Emily just how far she'd traveled from them. It began with a letter. Not a text, not a phone call, not a knock on the door. A real letter handwritten arriving in Emily's mailbox on an ordinary Thursday nearly 6 years after her wedding. She recognized the handwriting before she even saw the name on the return address, and her heart did something complicated in her chest. A small stutter of old fear followed immediately by the steady, grounded calm she'd spent years building. It was from Olivia. Emily stood at the end of her driveway, the letter in her hand, and for a long moment she considered throwing it away unopened. The restraining orders had long since expired, but the distance they'd created had become a permanent part of the landscape of Emily's life, and she'd made her peace with that distance. She didn't need whatever was inside this envelope. She didn't need Olivia's words, whatever they were apology or accusation or plea. She had built a life that required nothing from her sister at all. But she was curious. Not weak. Curious. There was a difference, and Emily had learned to tell them apart. So she carried the letter inside, and she set it on her kitchen table, and she made herself a cup of coffee, and she sat down and opened it. What she found was not what she expected. Olivia's letter did not ask for anything. That was the first thing Emily noticed, and it changed everything. There was no request for money, no plea to be let back in, no manipulation dressed up as reconciliation. Instead, Olivia wrote about her daughter, who was 6 now, and about the small apartment she'd finally managed to rent on her own after years of living with their parents. She wrote about the job she'd found nothing glamorous cleaning offices at night, while a neighbor watched her daughter, but a job she'd gotten herself and kept for 2 years running. And then she wrote the thing that made Emily set the letter down and press her hand to her mouth. Olivia wrote that she understood now, that it had taken her years and a collapse and raising a child alone in the wreckage of her own choices, but that she finally understood what she had done to Emily. Not the surface of it, the affair, the betrayal, but the depth of it, what it meant to take someone's whole world and build your own on top of it, what it meant to be the reason someone's family turned against them. She wrote that she wasn't asking for forgiveness because she'd come to believe she hadn't earned it, and that asking for it would just be one more thing she was taking. She was writing, she said, only because she wanted Emily to know that the lesson had finally landed, that Emily had been right in that message years ago when she'd said that Olivia would have to build her life the way Emily had built hers, on her own, from the ground up, and that Olivia had done it, slowly, painfully. But she'd done it, and every hard-won brick of it had taught her exactly what she'd stolen from her sister all those years ago. I don't expect you to write back, the letter ended. I don't expect anything from you, and that's the point. For the first time in my life, I'm not trying to take something from you. I just wanted you to know that you were right and that I'm sorry, and that the woman you became after what I did to you is the reason I finally understood I could become someone too. You saved my life without ever meaning to and without ever helping me, which I know is the strangest thing to say. But it's true. Watching you refuse to rescue me was the thing that finally taught me to rescue myself. Emily sat at her kitchen table for a long time after she finished reading, and she cried, but they were not the tears of the parking garage, and they were not the tears of the motel room. They were something new, something she didn't have a name for. They were the tears of a wound that had healed so completely that it could finally be touched without pain. She showed the letters to Margaret that afternoon. Margaret was 80 now, slower than she'd once been, her hands more fragile, but her mind as sharp and clear as it had ever been, and she read the letter twice, and then she set it down and looked at Emily over her glasses. "Well," Margaret said, "how does it feel?" "I don't know," Emily admitted. That's the honest answer. Part of me is happy for her, genuinely happy. She built something. She changed. Part of me is proud, which is strange because what right do I have to be proud of her? And part of me is just, I don't know, tired almost. Like a chapter I thought was closed, opened up one more time just long enough to show me it really is closed. "And are you going to write back?" Emily considered it. She'd spent years being certain she never would, that the door was locked and the key thrown away. But the woman who'd written this letter wasn't the woman who'd stood screaming on her porch. This was someone who had done the work, who had built something, who had in her own broken and belated way become a person capable of writing a letter that asked for nothing. "I think I am," Emily said slowly. "Not to reconcile, not to open the door and let her back into my life. That door stays where it is. But to answer, because she wrote to me like a person now, not like someone trying to get something. And I think that deserves an answer. One person to another, even if we never speak again after it." Margaret smiled the deep, satisfied smile of a woman who had watched a broken girl become a whole woman over the course of many years. "You know," she said, "when you first came to my house, you couldn't have done this. You'd have either slammed the door completely out of fear or thrown it wide open out of that old need to fix everything and be loved by everyone. But this answering with an open heart and a closed door at the same time, holding both of those things without contradiction, that takes a kind of strength most people never develop. You've got it. I always knew you would." So Emily wrote back. It was a short letter, and she chose every word with care because words mattered, and because this was in all likelihood the last real thing she and her sister would ever exchange. "Olivia," she wrote, "thank you for your letter. I'm not going to pretend it didn't move me because it did. I'm glad you built a life. I'm glad you understand now. And I want you to know that I forgave you a long time ago, though not for the reason you might think. I didn't forgive you for your sake. I forgave you for mine, because carrying the anger was heavier than putting it down, and I wanted to be free more than I wanted to be right. You don't need my forgiveness to keep building your life, and you never did. So take it or leave it, but know that it's there. I hope your daughter grows up watching you build something honest. That's the best gift you can give her, better than anything you could ever take from anyone. I won't be reaching out again, and I know you won't either, and I think that's how it should be. But I'm genuinely glad you're okay. Take care of yourself, and take care of that little girl. Emily." She mailed it the next morning, and then she let it go completely the way she'd learned to let things go. She didn't wonder about Olivia's reaction. She didn't wait for a response, and there wasn't one, and that was exactly right. The exchange had been what it was, a final acknowledgement between two people who had once been sisters and had traveled to opposite ends of the earth from where they'd started. It was closure, real closure, the kind that doesn't require anyone to be back in your life. And Emily felt lighter for it the way you feel lighter after setting down something you'd been carrying so long you'd forgotten its weight. Life went on fuller and richer with each passing year. Emily and Isaiah had built something remarkable together, a partnership so steady and so honest that Emily sometimes had to remind herself it was real, that she was actually living it. His daughter had grown up and gone off to college and come back on breaks, and over the years had come to think of Emily not as a stepmother exactly, but as something she once described in a toast at her college graduation, as the person who taught me what a woman looks like when she refuses to be broken. Emily had cried at that, right there in the restaurant, and Isaiah had held her hand under the table, and it had been one of the finest moments of her life. Emily had risen at the hospital too, all the way up. She'd become the director of patient care coordination, overseeing the very department she'd once entered as a coordinator, running double shifts to save herself from ruin. And in that role, she'd done something that mattered to her more than any promotion. She'd started a quiet program, unofficial at first, and then formalized to help hospital employees who were going through crises in their personal lives. A fund for people who needed a little help, a network of resources, a system that made sure that when someone came to work with their whole world falling apart, they didn't have to face it entirely alone the way she once had. She thought about it as a way of paying forward what Margaret had done for her. Margaret, who had crossed a hallway and taken her by the elbow and said, "Where are you staying tonight?" and meant it. Emily couldn't take every struggling employee into her home the way Margaret had taken her, but she could build a system that made sure someone reached out, that made sure no one fell as far and as alone as she once had. And over the years, dozens of people had been caught by that net, had been given a room or a loan, or just a person to talk to at the moment they needed it most, and most of them never knew that the whole thing had been built by a woman who'd once sat in a motel room with $11.43 and no one to call. But Emily knew, and that was enough. Margaret died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 83, and Emily was with her in her final weeks in the same house where Emily had once occupied the spare room. The roles now gently reversed, Emily caring for the woman who had once cared for her. And in one of their last real conversations, Margaret had taken Emily's hand and said something that Emily would carry for the rest of her days. "You know what I'm proudest of?" Margaret had said, her voice thin, but her eyes clear. "It's not that I gave you a room. Anybody could have given you a room. I'm proud that I got to watch what you did with it. Some people, you give them a chance and they waste it. You took a spare room and a cup of tea and you built an entire life out of it. A whole life, Emily. A home, a marriage, a career, a family you chose, and a program that's going to keep helping people long after both of us are gone. You didn't just save yourself. You turned your salvation into a machine that saves other people. That's the finest thing I've ever seen a human being do, and I got a front row seat to all of it. That's what I'm proud of, that I was there to see it." Emily had held her hand and cried and said, "You didn't just have a front row seat, Margaret. You built the theater. None of it happens without you. You were the mother I should have had. You were my family when my family threw me away. Everything I am because you crossed that hallway." And Margaret had smiled and squeezed her hand and said, "Then we built it together. Fair enough. But you did the hard part. Never forget that. You did the hard part." Margaret's funeral was full, the small church packed with people whose lives she'd touched over 83 years, and Emily gave the eulogy, and she stood at the front of that church and told the story of a supervisor who'd taken one look at a shattered woman in a hospital hallway and decided for no reason other than simple human kindness to save her. She told them that family isn't blood. Family is the people who show up. Family is the person who says, "Where are you staying tonight?" and means it. And she looked out at the sea of faces, all these people whom Margaret had shown up for, and she understood that she was looking at Margaret's real legacy, A whole room full of chosen family, a web of kindness that would outlive them all. After the funeral, Emily's father came to her. He was very old now and frail, and Diane had passed 2 years earlier, and Olivia's daughter was nearly grown, and the family that had once thrown Emily away had thinned and softened with time the way all things do. Robert had respected Emily's peace for years, calling only rarely, always gently, always without demand. But he'd come to Margaret's funeral because he'd known what Margaret meant to Emily, and standing in the parking lot afterward, he'd taken his daughter's hands in his trembling ones and said, "She was your real mother. I know that, and I'm not jealous, Emmy. I'm grateful, because I couldn't be what you needed when you needed it, and she could and she was. I failed you, but she caught you, and I've thanked God every day since that somebody caught you when I dropped you." And Emily, standing in that parking lot, older now herself, having traveled such an impossibly long road from the woman who'd once collapsed over a steering wheel, looked at her aged father and felt no anger. The anger had been gone for years. What she felt instead was a soft, sad, complicated love. The love you can only feel for someone who hurt you badly and then lived long enough to fully understand what they'd done. "You didn't drop me, Dad?" she said gently. "You looked away when I needed you to look. That's not the same as dropping me, but it's not nothing either. And I made my peace with it a long time ago. Margaret caught me, yes. But you know what? You're here now. You've been here in your quiet way for years. You never once tried to take anything from me. You respected every boundary I set. You believed me when it counted, even if it was late. And that means something. It doesn't undo the past, but it means something." She squeezed his hands. "I'm glad you're my father, even after everything. I'm glad." Robert wept an old man's quiet tears, and Emily held him, and in that moment, something that had been broken for the better part of 2 decades came, if not fully mended, then at least gently finally at rest. He lived 3 more years, and in those years Emily let him back in carefully on her terms at the pace she chose. He came to Sunday dinners, sometimes sitting at the table with Isaiah and Denise, and the chosen family Emily had built. An old man welcomed not because blood demanded it, but because he had earned through years of patience and humility and respect a small and honored place. And when he died, Emily grieved him honestly, without the complicated bitterness that had once tangled every thought of her family, because they had made their peace, and there was nothing left unsaid between them, and that Emily had learned was the greatest gift you could give or receive at the end. Nothing left unsaid. Emily grew old in the home she'd bought with her own hands. She and Isaiah lived out their years on that same front porch, watching the seasons turn, surrounded by the deep and abiding love of a life built entirely on honesty. And in her later years, Emily became something of a quiet legend among the younger women at the hospital, the ones who came to her when their own lives fell apart, the ones who'd heard whispers of her story and came seeking the woman who'd rebuilt herself from nothing. And Emily would sit with them and listen the way Margaret had once listened to her, and at the end she would always say the same thing. "The thing that feels like the end of your life," she would tell them, "might just be the beginning of your real one. The people who throw you away are doing you a favor you won't understand for years. And a home, a real home, a life that no one can ever take from you, is not something anyone gives you. It's something you build, brick by brick, choice by choice, starting with the single decision to refuse to let the worst thing that ever happened to you become the last thing that defines you. That's the whole secret. That's everything I know. Now go build." And they would go, and they would build. And Emily, sitting in the home she'd earned, surrounded by the family she'd chosen having, outlived every doubt and every doubter, having transformed the greatest betrayal of her life into the foundation of its greatest peace, would watch them go with a full and grateful heart. She had lost everything once on the worst day of her life, with a suitcase and a few $100s and nowhere to go. And out of that, nothing through nothing but her own courage and resilience and unbreakable self-respect, she had built everything that mattered. A home no one could take, a love built on truth instead of lies, a family measured by loyalty instead of blood, and a legacy of kindness that would ripple outward through the lives of strangers long after she was gone. The people who once threw her away had faded into the past, some gone entirely, some at rest, some, like Olivia, living out redemptions of their own at a distance. And Emily Carter remained exactly where she'd always dreamed of being, on the porch of a home she'd earned, holding the hand of a man who loved her honestly at peace, with everything and everyone needing nothing from anyone free. That was the whole story. That was the point. She had been thrown away, and she had refused to stay thrown away. She had been told she was nothing, and she had built something so real and so lasting that the word nothing lost all meaning. And in the end, the greatest revenge had turned out to be exactly what she'd always suspected it would be. Not revenge at all. Just a life so peaceful, so full, so completely and unshakably her own, that the approval of the people who'd hurt her simply stopped mattering. Emily Carter built her home brick by brick. She held the keys until the very end. And no one, not once, ever took them from her again. That was her victory. That was her peace. And that at last was her home.